know, we're
négociations
seeking the
commerciales
best
avec
deal
les
for
États-Unis.
Canadians.
Nous
We have
sommes à
not
la
yet
recherche
reached
du
that
meilleur
deal.
accord avec les
Negotiations
États-Unis.
will
On n'y est pas
continue
encore. Les
as we do.
négociations vont se
Mr.
poursuivre
LeBlanc
jusqu'à ce
and
qu'on y
senior
arrive.
officials
Le
will
ministre
remain in
Leblanc
Washington
et des hauts fonctionnaires
in
seront
pursuit
à
of that.
Washington pour
The
arriver
focus
à
of
cette
our
fin.
meeting was really the Middle East.
L'objectif de la réunion
The level
d'aujourd'hui,
of
c'est le
human suffering
Proche-Orient.
in Gaza
La
is
souffrance
intolerable
humaine à
and
Gaza
it's
est
rapidly
intolérable
deteriorating.
et la situation se détériore
Des dizaines
rapidement.
de milliers de Palestiniens ont été
Tens of
tués.
thousands of Palestinians
Des
have been
milliers
killed.
d'autres sont au bord
Thousands
de la
more
famine.
are on the brink of famine.
Le Canada condamne le fait que le gouvernement
Canada condemns the
israélien a
fact that the
laissé la
Israeli
catastrophe
government
se
has let the
détériorer.
situation
à Gaza.
deteriorate in Gaza. To
En
this
tant que
extent,
membre fondateur des Nations
we
Unies
are a
et de
founding
l'OTAN,
member of
le
both the
Canada est
United Nations
parmi les
and of
premiers à
NATO.
défendre la paix
As such,
et
Canada
de
is
la
always among the
sécurité
first to stand
dans le
to
monde.
defend peace and security
Nous avons le
around the world.
devoir de faire
It is
respecter les
our
droits
duty
de la
to
personne
ensure that human rights are
l'international
upheld abroad.
et de favoriser la paix et la sécurité
We also have a
au
duty to
pays
promote peace and safety
et
in
à l'étranger.
Canada and around the world.
Earlier this week, the Minister of Foreign Affairs representing Canada
Cette semaine, la
at the
ministre des
UN
Affaires
high-level conference
étrangères
on a
a
two-state
représenté le Canada
solution in New
à
York.
une réunion de haut niveau des Nations
In recent
Unies
days,
sur
I've
la
spoken with
solution à
our
deux
allies,
États.
including President
Récemment, j'ai
Macron,
parlé avec
Prime
nos
Minister
alliés,
Starmer,
le Premier
President
ministre
von der
Macron,
Leyen.
le Premier ministre
Also had a
Starmer,
number of discussions with our
la
ambassador
Première
to the
ministre
United
von der
Nations to operate.
Leyen, ainsi qu'un grand nombre de nos partenaires.
International cooperation is
La
essential to
coopération
securing
internationale est essentielle
lasting peace
pour
and
qu'on
stability
arrive à
in the
une
Middle East.
paix
And Canada
durable au Proche-Orient.
will do its best to help
Le
lead that
Canada
effort.
va faire de son mieux pour qu'on y arrive.
Canada has long been committed
Le Canada
to a
tient depuis
two-state
longtemps à
solution.
une solution à deux États,
An independent, viable, and sovereign Palestinian
Une-
state
un État
living
palestinien
side
indépendant
by
et
side
souverain qui
with the
est
state of
vit
Israel
aux
in
côtés
peace and
d'Israël
security.
dans la paix et la sécurité.
For decades, it was
Pendant
hoped
des
that this
décennies,
outcome would be
on
achieved as
espérait
part of a peace process
que
built
le
around a
processus de
negotiated
paix
settlement
permettrait d'arriver
between
à
the
cette
Israeli
fin
government and the
avec un
Palestinian
accord
Authority.
négocié entre l'État israélien et
Regrettably,
l'autorité palestinienne.
This approach
Malheureusement,
is no longer tenable.
cette approche n'est plus tenable.
Prospects for a two-state solution have been steadily and gravely
D'une
eroded,
solution à deux États
including by
se sont
the
étiolées
pervasive threat of Hamas terrorism
à
to
cause
Israel
de la
and its
menace
people,
du Hamas contre
culminating in
Israël
the
et sa
heinous
population,
attack
y
of October
compris
7th,
les attaques haineuses du 7
2023.
octobre
The
2023.
terrorist organization Hamas's long-standing violent
L'organisation
rejection of
terroriste,
Israel's
le
right to
Hamas,
exist
a longtemps violé
and
le
its
droit
rejection of a
d'Israël
two-state solution.
d'exister et a rejeté la solution à deux États.
The accelerated settlement building across the West Bank and East Jerusalem,
Les colonisations en
all
Cisjordanie
the while,
et dans
while settler
Jérusalem
violence against
Est
Palestinians has soared, has also
et
undermined
la
the process.
violence contre les
As have
Palestiniens ont
actions
également
such as the
miné
E1
le
settlement
processus
plan
de paix.
and this month's vote
C'est sans
by the
parler
Knesset
du
calling for the
plan
annexation
E1
of the
et
West Bank,
le vote de la Knesset
and the ongoing
d'annexer
failure of the Israeli government to prevent the rapidly
d'annexer la
deteriorating
Palestine.
humanitarian disaster in Gaza,
La
with
catastrophe
impeded access
humanitaire
to
se
food and other
détériore
essential
à
humanitarian
Gaza.
supplies.
La population n'a
The
pas
deepening
l'accès
suffering of
nécessaire
civilians leaves
aux
no room
denrées
for delay in
alimentaires,
coordinated international action
d'où
to support peace,
l'importance
security, and the
d'une
dignity
action
of human life.
concertée pour protéger la dignité
Preserving a
humaine.
two-state solution means standing with all
solution à
people who
deux États,
choose peace over violence
C'est
or
de
terrorism.
parler
It means
aux
honoring
côtés de ceux qui
their
défendent la
innate
paix et la
desire for
sécurité,
peaceful
non pas
coexistence,
le terrorisme, et
peaceful
qui prônent
coexistence of Israeli and Palestinian
une
states as
coexistence
the only
pacifique
roadmap for secure
entre Israël et la
prosperous
Palestine
long-term future.
comme étant la seule voie
Pour
d'un
ces raisons,
avenir
le
prospère.
Canada a l'intention de reconnaître
This is why
l'État de la
Canada
Palestine
intends to
lors de
recognize the state
le
of Palestine at the
80e
80th
session de
General Assembly of
l'Assemblée
the United
générale des
Nations,
Nations Unies en septembre
which will take place in
2025.
September 2025.
Cette intention repose sur
We
la volonté,
intend to
la
do so
volonté de l'autorité palestinienne
because the
de mener
Palestinian
des
Authority
réformes essentielles,
has committed to
notamment
lead
la
much
promesse
needed
de son
reform.
président Mahmoud Abbas d'organiser des élections
The Palestinian
générales
Authority's president,
en
Mahmoud Abbas,
2026
has
et
committed
de ne
to
pas
holding general
militariser
elections in
l'État
2026.
palestinien.
He has also committed to not
Le Canada va
militarizing the
redoubler
state of Palestine.
d'efforts pour appuyer une
Canada
gouvernance
will
forte
continue to work
en
hard to
Palestine
support
et
strong
contribuer à
governance
un
in
avenir
Palestine.
pacifique et
Canada
promoteur
will contribute to a peaceful and
Je me
promising
suis
future for the people of
entretenu
Palestine.
avec le président Abbas pour
I met
réaffirmer
with President Abbas
ces points.
to restate these commitments.
For the reasons I cited earlier, Canada intends to
Pour les raisons
recognize
que
the
j'ai
state of
données tout à
Palestine
l'heure, le Canada a
the 80th
l'intention de
session
reconnaître
of the
l'État de
United
Palestine
Nations
à la
General
80e
Assembly in
session
September
de l'Assemblée générale des
2025.
Nations unies en septembre
This
2025.
intention is predicated on the
Cette
Palestinian
intention
Authority's
repose
commitment to
sur la
much needed
volonté de
reform,
l'État,
including
la
commitments
volonté
by
de
the
la
Palestinian
Palestine de
Authority's
mener des
President
réformes importantes,
Abbas to fundamentally reform
y
its government,
compris
to
de
hold general
réformer la
elections in
gouvernance, de
2026
tenir
in
des
which
élections
Hamas can play
générales en
no part,
2026, là où
and
le
to
Hamas ne peut jouer aucun
demilitarize the
rôle, et
Palestinian
de
state.
démilitariser l'État palestinien.
Canada will increase its efforts in supporting strong
Le
democratic
Canada
governance
va
in
soutenir
Palestine
une
and
gouvernance
the
forte
contributions
et
of its people
démocratique en
to a more
Palestine
peaceful
et
and
la
hopeful
contribution de
future.
la population à
I
un
spoke today
avenir
with President Abbas at length to reaffirm
plus
his
pacifique.
commitment.
J'ai parlé au président Hamas
Canada
pour
reiterates
réaffirmer
that Hamas must
notre
immediately
volonté.
release all hostages taken
Le
in the
Hamas
horrific
doit libérer
terrorist
tous les
attack of
otages
October
qui ont
7th,
été pris dans
that Hamas must
l'attaque
disarm,
haineuse du 7
and that
octobre. Le
Hamas
Hamas doit
must
se
play
désarmer
no role
et le
in the
Hamas
future
ne doit
governance
jouer
of
aucun
Palestine.
rôle dans la gouvernance future de la Palestine.
Canada will always steadfastly support
Le
Israel's
Canada va
existence as an
toujours
independent state in the
soutenir
Middle East, living in
l'existence
peace
d'Israël
and security.
au Proche-Orient dans
Any
un
path
environnement de
to
paix
lasting peace for
et de
Israel
stabilité.
also requires a viable and stable Palestinian state,
Cela requiert
and
un
one
État
that
palestinien
recognizes
viable
Israel's inalienable right to security and
et
peace.
la reconnaissance du droit inaliénable d'Israël à la paix et à la
Le Canada
sécurité.
a déjà engagé plus de
Canada has already
340
committed over
millions de dollars
$340
pour
million
remédier à
in
la
order
situation humanitaire
to address
désastreuse.
the disastrous
Gaza.
humanitarian situation in
Depuis,
Gaza.
Nous nous sommes engagés à accorder un
Moreover,
nouveau financement de 30
we have
millions de dollars
also
pour
pledged
aider
to
à répondre
offer
aux besoins
an
des
additional
civils
$30 million
palestiniens.
in order to meet the
Nous
needs
fournissons
of Palestinians.
aussi 10 millions de dollars de plus
We are
pour
also
soutenir
pledging
l'autorité
an additional
palestinienne
$10 million to
dans
support the
ses efforts de
Palestinian Authority
stabilisation et de gouvernance
to
de la
support them
Cisjordanie.
in stabilizing the
Nous
West Bank
travaillons
and
avec
in
nos
governance
alliés
of the West
pour
Bank.
fournir une aide immédiate
We are
aux
working with our
personnes
allies
qui ont
to deliver immediate aid to those who
désespérément
so desperately
besoin.
need it.
Nous collaborons directement
We are
avec des
working
partenaires
directly
comme la
with
Jordanie
partners
afin
such
de
as Jordan
d'acheminer
in
l'aide aux
order to
populations
deliver
dans les jours
assistance
à venir.
to those who need it.
Et nous
in the
allons
upcoming days.
intensifier les efforts que nous déployons
We will
avec nos
intensify
partenaires
our efforts
internationaux afin d'élaborer
alongside our international
plan de paix
partners in
crédible.
order to develop a
Ce
credible
plan
peace plan.
établira des mécanismes
This
de
plan
gouvernance et de
will
sécurité
establish
pour la Palestine
governance and security
et
mechanisms for
garantira
Palestine.
l'acheminement
The plan
de l'aide
will
humanitaire
ensure
nécessaire
that
à Gaza.
humanitarian aid is delivered to Gaza
Canada
as
will be a
needed.
constructive partner in building a just, meaningful, and
Le
lasting
Canada
peace in the
sera un
region,
partenaire
and a
constructif
future that respects
pour
the dignity,
un
security, and the
avenir
aspirations of all
juste
Palestinians and Israelis.
et pacifique dans le Proche-Orient.
We say the devastation in the Middle East is deeply personal
La
to many
catastrophe
Canadians.
au Proche-Orient touche
Palestinian
personnellement
Canadians are
bien les
watching as
Canadiens.
communities
Les
across
Canadiens
Gaza
d'origine
face
palestinienne
destruction and deprivation,
voient les
and as
privations,
communities
la
in the West
destruction à
Bank
Gaza,
are annexed.
alors que des
The
communautés en
heinous attacks of
Cisjordanie
October
sont
7th
annexées. Les
traumatized the
attaques
Jewish people in
haineuses
Israel and here in
du
Canada.
7 octobre ont
around
traumatisé
the
les
world.
populations juives au Canada
With
et
each day
partout dans
that the
le monde.
remaining hostages, the remains are not returned, families live in fear. and
Les
grief.
familles vivent dans la peur
The
et dans
rising
la souffrance
anti-Semitism and
avec
the
chaque jour
words,
qui passe
actions,
sans
and
nouvelles
violence,
de leurs proches.
including against Jewish communities
On
right
observe
here in
également
Canada, is
des actes de
abhorrent.
violence contre les
And
populations
it's
juives
why
ici
we're
même au
introducing
Canada.
legislation this
C'est
fall
abominable
that will make it
et
a
c'est pour
criminal
ça que
offense
nous allons
to
présenter un projet de
intentionally
loi cet
and
automne
willfully
pour que
obstruct
ce
access
soit une
to a
infraction
place of worship.
d'interdire l'accès à
schools,
des lieux de
and
culte,
community
à des
centers.
écoles et des centres communautaires.
We will also invest in the physical protection
Nous
of
allons
vulnerable
également
communities.
investir dans la protection
places
physique de communautés vulnérables et des lieux de culte.
Basic security is an inalienable
La
right of
sécurité
every
est
human
un
being.
droit inaliénable
that
de
right
tous
for
les
every
êtres humains.
Canadian.
Et nous allons défendre ce
The
droit
two-state
pour tous nos
solution
concitoyens.
Canada supports is built on the promise of
La
Israelis
solution à
and
deux
Palestinians
États
living side by side in
repose
peace and
sur
security.
l'idée qu'Israël et la
thank you
Palestine
for your
peuvent
attention, Anand,
vivre
And the
côte à
minister and I
côte
would be happy
dans la paix et
now
la
to take your
sécurité.
questions.
Je vous remercie et je suis disposé à répondre à vos
Merci.
questions.
Thank you, Prime Minister.
Merci, Monsieur
I'm
le Premier
told that
ministre.
we will have about 15 minutes of questions.
On
Donc,
me
on
dit
va
qu'il y aura
commencer
15
comme
minutes
le veut
de
la tradition par les
questions.
journalistes dans la salle.
As usual, we
Et
will start
ensuite, on va
with
passer aux
questions from
journalistes sur
journalists in the
Zoom. Si
room.
vous êtes
Then we
à
will
distance
take
sur la
questions
plateforme
from
Zoom,
journalists
je
on
vous
Zoom.
inviterai
If you are
à utiliser la
participating
fonction
online
lever la
via
main
Zoom,
pour
please use
être
the raise hand
reconnu
function
ensuite.
so that we can
On
call
va
on
rester
you.
sur le principe une question et une
There
question de
will be
suivi.
one
S'il
question
vous
and one
plaît,
follow-up question per
gardez vos
journalist.
questions les plus concises possibles pour
Please be as concise
évidemment
as
passer le
possible
plus de journalistes possible.
so
Just a
that
quick
as many
note
journalists can ask
to be
questions as
mindful
possible.
for interpreter friends, if you have an earpiece, just
Pour
keep
les
it away
interprètes,
from the
si vous
microphone
avez
at all
une
time.
oreillette, veuillez tenir cette oreillette
We'll
loin du
start
microphone
with
en
Paul
usage.
Wells.
Nous allons commencer par Paul Wells.
Thanks, Boris. Good
Merci,
afternoon, Prime
Boris.
Minister. You
Bonjour,
say
Monsieur le
that the
Premier ministre.
recognition of a
Vous
Palestinian
dites que la
state is
reconnaissance de
predicated
l'État
on
de
important
Palestine
democratic reforms.
repose
Is it
sur des
conditional
réformes
on quick
démocratiques
action
importantes.
towards those reforms? Is there any scenario in which you
Y
arrive
a-t-il
at
un
the General
scénario
Assembly
où
and
vous
don't
arrivez
recognize
à
Palestine?
la session
Can I-
générale
can
des
I-
Nations
thanks
Unies
for
que
the
vous ne
question, Mr. Wells.
reconnaissez pas l'État de
Let
Palestine?
me say on the second part, it's an
Merci,
intention,
Monsieur
so
Wells.
of course, there's a
C'est notre
scenario,
intention.
possibly one that I can't imagine,
Il
so
y a
I
un
wouldn't want to.
scénario que
If there were no scenario, we
je ne
would
pourrais pas
proceed
imaginer.
immediately.
S'il n'y avait pas de scénario imaginable,
good
on
point.
procéderait
But
de la
to go
sorte
more broadly and,
immédiatement. Mais
maybe
pour
this is
répondre à
important,
votre question plus
area
globalement,
you're concentrating on, it's predicated, it relies upon the representations that have been made by the
nous
Palestinian
avons fait
Authority,
valoir des arguments
representations
auprès
that
de
have been made
l'autorité
now
palestinienne,
several times,
des
both
arguments qui ont
publicly
été
spoken
présentés
in
plusieurs
writing,
fois,
to me,
tant
as,
à l'oral
Prime Minister,
et par écrit,
and representations that I tested, if you will, President
Ce sont
Abbas
des
in a lengthy and robust
arguments que
today,
j'ai
to
rappelés
confirm,
au président
the
Hamas
intentions,
aujourd'hui avec
and,
le président
and the
Hamas au
ability to do
téléphone.
so. Now, part of what Minister Anand and her colleagues
La
are
ministre
doing
Anand et
is to
ses
provide
collègues
some resources to help with some
fournissent
governance
des
aspects
ressources
of those.
pour
But of course, the
contribuer
most important element
aux
of
réformes de
those
gouvernance.
representations, with respect to the democratic process.
C'est l'un des aspects les plus
Who
importants de
cannot
ces
be part of
réformes.
that process? Hamas.
Le
Who can
Hamas
play
ne
no
peut
role
pas
in the
faire
future state.
partie
Hamas. The
de l'État
demilitarization
palestinien à
and
venir.
the persistent
Il faut que l'État palestinien
demilitarized
soit,
Palestinian state,
que
and
le
of
Hamas
course, the
soit
reinforcement
démilitarisé, que
of the
la
importance of
Palestine
living
le
side
soit
by
aussi,
side, peace and security,
pour que
with Israel.
Israël et
So
Palestine
it's a
puissent
relatively
vivre
short
côte
period.
à
Last
côte dans la paix et
observation,
la
if I may.
sécurité.
It's a relatively short period of time
C'est
between
une
now and
courte
the UN General
période
Assembly.
de temps, donc
But we'll be
d'ici
working with the
à
Palestinian
l'Assemblée
Authority,
générale des Nations unies,
and very
nous
importantly,
allons
not just us,
collaborer avec l'autorité
but a series
palestinienne,
of our
pas
allies
juste
and
nous, mais nos
regional
alliés
powers,
aussi et des pouvoirs
including
régionaux,
those that the minister was with in
y
New York
compris
earlier
que la
this week,
ministre
and
a rencontré à
and
New
in the
York
mall, but
cette
of
semaine.
course,
Je ne pourrais pas
Saudi
tous les
Arabia,
nommer, mais
Qatar,
l'Arabie saoudite,
Egypt, and
le
others,
Qatar, l'Égypte
who
et d'autres,
also, to broaden your question
qui,
a
eux
bit,
aussi,
have been very clear now that Hamas can play no role, that Hamas must
affirment
return
que
all
le
the
Hamas ne
hostages
peut
that
jouer
remain,
aucun rôle et doivent rendre
and the Palestinian
tout,
state must be demolished.
tous les
Follow-up.
prisonniers.
Yesterday, you had announced no intention
Une
to
question
recognize
complémentaire.
Palestine.
Hier,
Today, you
vous
have
n'aviez
announced
pas
that intention. It's
d'intention
impossible
de
for me
reconnaître
not
l'État
to
de
read into
Palestine.
that a
Aujourd'hui,
critique of
vous en avez
Israel's recent
l'intention.
behavior in the region.
Est-ce
Well, it's
est-ce que vous critiquez le comportement
there are
d'Israël dans la
elements,
région?
and I listed them in my remarks, and they played a
J'en
central
ai parlé
factor in
dans
our
mes
decision.
remarques
I think
et
one of
ce
the
qu'on a
one
vu
of the core
dernièrement
points
a joué un rôle
is
dans ma
that
décision.
Canada's had a
L'un des
long-standing
aspects clés,
principled stand, as
c'est
you
que
know.
le
I won't
Canada,
repeat it. You're
depuis
familiar
très
with it.
longtemps,
A
a
belief in a two-state
une
solution,
position très
inalienable
fondée
rights
sur des principes,
of both people,
une solution à
and the
deux
fact
États,
that
les
peace and
droits
security can only
inaliénables des
be
deux
achieved through
populations et la paix
that
et la
prospect.
sécurité.
That possibility of a two-state solution is being eroded before our eyes.
Ces
The
perspectives
accelerated
s'étiolent
settlements,
sous nos yeux.
the potential
On
partition
pense à la
of the West
colonisation
Bank,
de la Cisjordanie. On pense
the actions
aussi à
in
la
Gaza that
séparation de
shift
la
large portions
Cisjordanie.
of the population, 80% of the population displaced. Other
Il y a
actions which are
80% de la
changing the
population qui est
facts on the
déplacée.
ground in a way that removes
Les
the
choses
possibility or
changent
lessens the
sur le
possibility
terrain, ce
of
qui
there being a
réduit la
Palestinian state.
possibilité d'un
And
État
then when that is
palestinien.
reinforced by votes to that effect, by statements and policies
On entend
to
des
that effect of the
déclarations,
government,
des
yes,
politiques,
that has
des
been
votes.
one of the factors
Oui,
that is,
c'est un
has brought
facteur
us to this point to try to
qui nous a
reverse
amenés
with partners. We're
au
not under
point où
illusions
on en
about
est
the strength
aujourd'hui.
of Canada, but to reverse with partners
On
this cycle
cherche
so that
à
a two-state
inverser
solution
le
becomes
cycle
viable.
qui est en
A
cours
lot
pour
more
que la
has to happen.
solution à deux États soit possible. Il reste
We'll
encore
go
beaucoup
to
de choses à
Stephen
faire
Davis,
d'ici.
Lobena.
Hello, Prime Minister. Just to pick
Bonjour,
up on what
Monsieur
you
le
said
Premier
there then, how do you see this
Pour revenir à ce que vous avez
recognition
dit, de quelle
as a
manière
way
est-ce que
to
vous
achieve that
pensez
peace?
que
Why is this a
cette
useful thing to do?
reconnaissance permettra d'arriver à la paix?
It's useful in several
La
respects,
reconnaissance
in
sera
our
utile
in
pour
our
plusieurs
judgment.
raisons.
The first is that it works with a series of partners in the region, traditional allies, but
De
other countries
participer
that we
beaucoup
have
de partenaires,
worked less with.
notamment des
Those
alliés
more broadly
traditionnels et
represented
d'autres
in the two-state solution process that
dans le
was
processus
more formally
de la
launched
solution à deux
earlier
États
this week.
que nous avons lancé,
Secondly,
qui a été
it
lancé plutôt cette semaine.
reaffirms and it
Deuxièmement,
broadens. We're part of
la
a process that
reconnaissance
broadens
réaffirme
the recognition of certain aspects that we have
la
always viewed as
reconnaissance de
fundamental
certains
for a Palestinian
aspects
state, but others have not
d'un
acknowledged.
État
No
palestinien
role
que
for
nous avons
Hamas,
toujours considéré comme
demilitarized.
étant fondamental,
And
par exemple la
To the horrible
démilitarisation.
specifics of the current situation, the return of all the hostages that never made.
Aussi,
Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Egypt is three examples
et
of
le
countries
retour
that now,
des
literally
otages
in
est
the
très
last
important.
few days, have made those
Ces derniers jours,
terminations.
d'autres pays ont
Um,
aussi
and the third
exprimé leur
aspect, and
accord
I'll
avec
hand
ça.
back, is that we are part of a process. We came to this
Nous
decision independently, but we are
Participons à
part
un processus, nous
processes
sommes arrivés à notre
that are
décision
working towards
indépendamment, mais nous
peace,
faisons
that
partie d'un
have
processus pour
strength
arriver
in
à la
breadth and
paix.
in number. So the two-state solution
Le
process,
fait qu'il y ait beaucoup de
you would have
participants
heard
va
reference to
renforcer
the E3
et
process,
assurer la
Germany,
réussite,
France,
nous espérons.
and the United Kingdom, and
Avec les
peace plan that
Nations Unies, nous
that
avons
they
un
are
plan
working
pour la
on, that
paix.
they briefed the U.S. president on. And in both those
Le
respects,
président
Canada
américain est
can
au courant
help
aussi
to
de ce
support
plan
those
pour la
efforts.
paix du Royaume-Uni.
It's not been clear, say, in the last 48 hours that either the
Au cours
Netanyahu
des
government
deux
or
derniers
Hamas is at all
jours,
interested
il
in
n'a
these
pas été
conditions.
clair si
And
le gouvernement
so
de
who's going to
Netanyahou
make them?
est d'accord
Well,
avec ces
the
conditions.
I think there's a couple of things. I mean, Hamas, I don't know, Hamas is not
Premièrement,
welcome in any way, shape,
le
or form.
Hamas
So of course,
n'est pas
and one of
bienvenu dans
one
le
of the issues
processus.
is not to give Hamas in any way, shape, or
Et
form
nous
a
ne
veto
voulons pas
over a
donner
process
au Hamas
that
un droit de
affects
veto sur le
both the Israeli and
processus.
Palestinian people. I could say much
C'est le
harsher things,
processus
and
qui
I should say
concerne
much
le
harsher
peuple
things about
israélien
Hamas, but
et
that's a
palestinien.
basic
Je pourrais dire d'autres
structural point.
choses plus sévères sur le Hamas, mais je vais m'en retenir.
There are some in positions of influence in the state
Certaines
of Israel
personnes qui
that
détiennent
do not
des
want a two-state
positions
solution,
d'influence en
that are taking
Israël
actions
qui
to
ne veulent
frustrate
pas
that
arriver à une
actively.
solution à deux États
And
ils
we are part
sont
of
actifs
a
et s'activent
growing
contre cette solution.
and very significant international community
Et il y a de plus
that
en plus de
is leaning
personnes
against
dans
them,
la communauté
that
internationale
is prioritizing
qui
the possibility and the prospect for a
travaillent
two-state solution.
pour la
Um,
possibilité d'une solution à deux États.
There are other measures that can be taken.
Nous pourrions prendre d'autres mesures également.
For now, what we're doing is
Pour le moment,
to promote a positive process towards
nous
peace.
voulons avoir un processus positif.
Olivier Ferrand-Boissé, TVA.
Olivier Ferrand-Boissé,
Oui, bonjour. Bonjour à vous deux.
TVA.
Pouvez-vous nous expliquer en
Hello,
quoi
hello to both of
de
you.
dire aujourd'hui que
Please
vous allez
explain
éventuellement
something.
reconnaître la
Today, you're
Palestine
saying
va
that
venir
you
changer quoi que ce
may
soit dans la
recognize
situation
Palestinian
humanitaire
statehood?
actuelle qui semble
What
être le
would
motif
that
principal derrière
change
votre
in the
déclaration
current
aujourd'hui?
humanitarian
Ok, ça,
situation, which
c'est une
in fact seems
question
to be the main
fondamentale. Merci
reason for your
pour
declaration,
cette
your
question.
statement
Alors,
today? Answer.
qu'est-ce
Thank you
qu'on
for
peut
that
faire?
very
Qu'est-ce que le
important
Canada peut
question.
faire pour la situation
What can
humanitaire
Canada do
actuelle
to
maintenant?
support the
C'est pas une question
ongoing
de diplomatie,
humanitarian
c'est une
crisis?
question de l'aide
It's not
humanitaire.
a matter of
Il
diplomacy,
faut
it's a
travailler
matter of
avec
humanitarian
nos
assistance.
partenaires, nos
We
interlocuteurs
must
dans la
work
région,
with our
par
partners in the
exemple
region.
la Jordanie
Our
et
partners
le Canada.
include Jordan,
Maintenant,
for example.
maintenant, à ce moment-ci,
Canada must
on travaille avec
now,
la
at
Jordanie
this very
afin
moment, in fact,
de
at this very moment,
fournir
we are working with
l'aide
Jordan
humanitaire
in
demain.
order to
à Gaza.
deliver
Il
humanitarian
n'y a
aid
que
to Gaza
4 ou
tomorrow.
5 pays qui peuvent
There
le
are
faire.
only 4
travers
or
le monde.
5 countries which are
Alors,
in a position
ça,
to do
c'est
so.
un processus, c'est bien sûr la
This is
situation
all part of the
humanitaire
process.
est reliée
The
à
humanitarian
la
situation
grande diplomatie,
is,
mais
of
c'est une
course,
question
related
pour le moment
to
actuel
broader
à
diplomacy.
Gaza.
But we
c'est,
must focus on the
c'est,
current situation in Gaza,
surtout, c'est une question de l'aide humanitaire.
which is a matter
Pour le
of
moment,
humanitarian aid.
pardon, pour le
That's what's
moment,
required.
l'État israélien ouvre un peu la
The
possibilité
state of
de fournir
Israel
de l'aide humanitaire.
is currently
J'aimerais vous relancer sur les négociations
opening the doors
commerciales
to more
avec les
humanitarian aid.
États-Unis.
Follow-up
Le temps
question.
presse.
I'd like to ask you about trade talks with the
On a
United
vu des
States.
accords signés
The clock is
avec l'Union
ticking.
européenne. Est-ce qu'à ce point-ci,
The United States
vous seriez
signed a
prêt
deal
à
with the
accepter un
European
accord dans
Union.
lequel on aurait
Would you, at
un
this
tarif
point, accept a
réduit de
deal
base
under
qui
which
inclurait
we
aussi
would have
des achats ou
a
des investissements aux États-Unis, comme on a vu avec l'Union
base
européenne?
tariff,
OK, c'est une
a lower
question
tariff baseline,
spécifique
as with
en ce qui
the
concerne
case
les
of the
négociations.
European Union?
Ils sont des négociations.
Answer,
Il y a,
that's a very specific
les
question about
négociations
the
sont,
ongoing negotiations.
ils sont constructifs, ils sont
Our
complexes,
talks
ils continuent.
thus far have been
Il
constructive
y a une
and they're
possibilité
ongoing.
que,
They cover a
la
broad
terminer,
variety of topics.
que les négociations ne finissent pas
Now,
le 1er août.
it
Ça,
is
c'est possible.
possible
Euh,
that we
en
may
ce qui
not
concerne, mais il y a
conclude
plusieurs
talks by August
plusieurs
1st,
occasions, opportunités
but
pour la collaboration
there are
entre
many
le Canada et les
avenues
États-Unis.
for
Ça, c'est
teamwork and
ça, c'est
cooperation
clair.
between Canada and the
Y
United States.
compris
Of
les
course,
investissements, les dépenses
this
canadiennes pour
includes
la défense et
investments.
la sécurité.
This also
Mais
includes Canadian
c'est milieu des
investments in
négociations.
defense and security.
Merci.
Talks are ongoing.
So
Thank you.
the question is, well, I'll simplify.
Je vais résumer un peu
To
la
say
question.
that, look, these are complex, they're comprehensive, they're constructive negotiations.
Et nous avons
With the
des
Americans are
préparés
ongoing.
complexes, continus et
It's possible
constructifs.
that they may
les
not
États-Unis.
conclude by the 1st
Il
of
se
August.
peut que nous ne finissions pas les
But we'll
préparés
see. The
d'ici le
team's there.
1er
We're
août,
working hard.
mais nous avons des
Conversations
équipes
today,
sur
myself.
place qui travaillent fort.
So we'll see.
Alors, nous verrons.
There are, and the specific aspect of the question included a
La
reference
question
to the European
portait en
Union deal.
particulier sur
And
l'accord conclu avec
could
l'Union
it include, could
européenne.
our
Est-ce
accord with
à
the United
savoir
States
si notre
include
accord
commitments on
pourrait
investment and other aspects?
inclure les
And I
engagements
just
sur des
observed that there are
investissements
many
et d'autres
areas for
aspects.
cooperation between Canada and the
Et
United
j'ai
States,
répété que le
including
Canada
defense spending,
communique,
security spending, investment,
collabore beaucoup
which
avec les
is one of the
États-Unis,
reasons
par
why
exemple, dans le domaine militaire.
we're having
Et
these
c'est
broader
une des
discussions.
raisons pour lesquelles
Next up, Paul Dutch,
nous collaborons.
Global News.
Speaking of the United States, did you consult with the
Concernant
U.S.
les
about your
États-Unis,
decision
est-ce
to
que
organize
vous avez
Palestine? And
consulté
can
les États-Unis concernant
sustainable
votre
peace
décision
process
sur
work
la
without
reconnaissance de
US
l'État
being outside?
palestinien?
Look, the United States is the essential partner
Les États-Unis sont
in,
un partenaire essentiel
in peace in the Middle East,
dans les pourparlers pour la
and
paix
in
au Moyen-Orient.
virtually in many parts of the world.
Et en fait, dans
And
beaucoup
we've
de
seen
parties du
that demonstrated.
Nous
First
l'avons
point.
vu.
Second point is that the president
monde. Aussi,
does take a direct
le
interest in
président
resolving
s'intéresse
conflicts, and
à la résolution des
as
conflits.
has with respect to a broader set of developments in the Middle East. And
On
so
s'y a
again,
fait au
the United
Moyen-Orient,
States,
par
this
exemple.
president
Donc, encore une fois,
will
les
play and
États-Unis
continue
et le
to play
président
a central role.
continuent de jouer un rôle
Others have
central.
responsibilities.
D'autres personnes ont
Canada
des
included,
responsabilités, d'autres
responsibilities on the
nations,
humanitarian
notamment le
side,
Canada,
responsibilities
pense qu'il y a
with
trait
governance
à-
and other aspects
à
that we're
l'aspect
supporting.
humanitaire.
And we make our own independent foreign policy
Et
positions.
nous
And when we see
prenons nos
opportunities, when we
décisions
see
sur la
necessity,
politique étrangère
which
de
is what
façon
we see
indépendante.
in this case, given the retreat of the prospect of a
cas,
two-state solution because of the facts on the
puisque
ground, as I explained.
La
We see that
possibilité
possibility and we see the
d'une solution à
combination
deux États
of an
s'étiole,
ability to influence
nous avons la possibilité
because of
quand
our own
même
voice and actions, but
d'influencer le
because of others
processus.
and other processes that are being put in place. But to be absolutely clear, and I'll finish on
Que
this
ça soit
point,
clair.
which is, I referenced earlier an E3 plan that the early stages
plutôt
peace
d'un
plan.
plan
I've talked to
E3
Prime Minister
qui en
Starmer
est
about
à
it,
ses
President
débuts.
Macron as well today.
Nous en avons parlé avec le Premier
Uh,
ministre,
Prime Minister Starmer,
Starmer
this public
et
domain,
Président
briefed the
Macron.
President of the United States about the plan.
le Premier
few days
ministre
ago.
Starmer a
So
parlé de
there are
ce plan.
connections all the way through, and
Président Trump.
my colleague obviously in regular
Donc,
contact.
tout le
with,
monde se parle et évidemment, notre
for,
ministre aussi
say,
fait
on
partie
note.
de la conversation.
You said you came to this decision
Vous
independently,
avez dit
so
qu'il
you're
s'agissait
saying you would have
d'une
come to this
décision prise
without France
indépendamment.
or the UK
No,
making
Vous
this
en
decision?
No,
Vous,
I mean,
vous auriez décidé de la
I mean,
façon, même
independent
si
of
la
the
France
United
n'avait
States,
pas pris
yeah,
cette décision,
but
ni le Royaume-Uni?
yes, it does matter that others are moving.
Oui, cela compte pour
It
quelque
does matter
chose que
because
d'autres
it
pays ont pris cette
increases the
décision.
prospect of
Cela
success.
améliore les chances
It,
pour la paix.
but the core of the decision
Mais la décision
is taken
tant que
on the
telle
principle that
a été
of self-determination and the rights of people to
en
self-determination.
fonction de
We have
l'autodétermination et le
long,
droit des
Canada,
peuples à
speaking for Canada now,
l'autodétermination.
have
Je
long
parle pour le
felt that
Canada. Le
this
Canada
should come
croit
later
depuis
in a process,
longtemps
and that
que cette
our
reconnaissance devrait
recognitions, other
venir un peu plus
recognitions,
tard dans le
the state of
processus.
Palestine, should come at a point of maximum impact
Cette
during the peace
reconnaissance
process.
devrait
We're now at a
être
position,
faite
I'm sorry to
lorsqu'elle
repeat
aura
myself,
le
where
plus
in our
d'impact
judgment and the
possible.
judgment of others,
Et donc,
is that the
selon
prospect of a Palestinian state
c'est notre opinion et c'est
literally
l'opinion que d'autres, que
receding
le
before
moment
our eyes,
est
and being
venu
eroded before our eyes.
parce que
And so the
l'État
act
palestinien disparaît
of-
devant nos yeux.
The intention to recognize
Donc,
is what we're
cette
saying today,
intention de
and working
reconnaître l'État
with others,
palestinien et la
to
collaboration
support
avec d'autres
a
pour
Palestinian state,
soutenir
possibility of Palestinian state
palestinien
reestablishes that.
réétablit ou
David Turton,
recréer
CBC.
cette possibilité. La CBC.
US trade talks. Is there any
Pour
evidence that
parler
a
avec
deal
les
with the US is
États-Unis,
possible without tariffs on
est-ce
aluminum
qu'on
and
a
steel?
l'impression
Aluminum steel.
qu'on peut
Look, I think
conclure
I'd
une
answer
entente
this way,
sans
which
avoir des
is
droits
that
douaniers?
the president has been very clear,
Le président a
and,
été très
and
clair
all
à
the
ce
actions
sujet.
bear this out, and that there are
Toutes les mesures
certain
qu'ils prennent
sectors that
semblent
are
confirmer.
strategic
Certains
in their
secteurs
judgment to the United States
stratégiques
economy.
sont
Aluminum,
importants
steel,
pour
automobiles,
l'économie des
pharmaceuticals,
États-Unis,
semiconductors,
l'aluminium, l'acier, les semi-conducteurs, les
lumber
automobiles,
falls
le bois
under
d'œuf
232 as well, the
fait
so-called
aussi
232
partie
authority,
du paragraphe
and potentially one or
232.
two more. The U.S. approach,
L'approche des
the revealed
États-Unis
approach of the United States in all those
que
sectors has been
nous
to have
voyons
tariffs,
concernant tous ces
some base
secteurs
level
et d'imposer
and
des tarifs
that's
douaniers
consistent.
dans
That's
tous ces
consistent
secteurs.
across with
Nous
very
l'avons vu
few
dans tous
relative
les domaines avec
exceptions.
très peu
So if we're
d'exceptions.
speaking in general terms,
Donc, de
those
façon
are the priors.
générale,
That's the case.
c'est ce qu'on a vu
Obviously, in any
jusqu'ici.
broader deal,
Et donc,
there
dans
are
un
gives and
accord
takes, and there's various factors.
plus
I think we have to
général,
recognize that
je
in the
pense que nous
strategic
devons
sector,
reconnaître qu'il y a certains
again, as
secteurs
defined by the United States, what's
stratégiques
strategic to them,
qui sont,
they
et
have tariffs.
c'est défini par les États-Unis
Okay.
que ces secteurs
And
sont
just coming
stratégiques
back
et ils vont
to,
imposer des tarifs.
the recognition of a Palestinian state,
Pour revenir
and
à
the
la
conditions
reconnaissance
that-
de l'État de la Palestine.
well, the assurances, excuse me, that you've been given by the Palestinian
Quelles sont
Authority,
les assurances que
elections,
vous avez reçues de la part de
reforms,
l'autorité
non-militarization.
palestinienne? Donc, les
Just coming back to
élections,
that
les
issue of
réformes,
elections, how do you
la
expect them to hold elections in
non-militarisation.
Gaza when
Comment est-ce que vous
you
vous
see the
attendez
devastation?
à ce qu'on
and when you see the
organise des
occupation
élections à
by the
Gaza
Israelis in the
alors
in
qu'on
West
a
Bank?
l'occupation
How can
de
they
la
hold
part des
elections?
Israéliens?
There
Comment est-ce
are
qu'on peut tenir des élections?
clearly that's not
Réponse.
not a possibility now. It's not a
Ce n'est clairement
possibility
pas une
in the near
possibilité
term.
en ce moment ni dans
And
un
part of
avenir
this again is
proche.
let's go back to where we're starting, which
Encore une
is
fois,
we are working
nous
ourselves with others
travaillons
to
avec d'autres
preserve the
pays
possibility of a two-state
pour
solution.
préserver cette possibilité
Do
d'avoir
not
une solution à deux
Allow
États.
the facts on the ground, deaths on the ground,
On ne veut pas
the settlements on the ground, the
permettre
appropriations on the
que
ground
les colonisations, que les
to
appropriations,
get to such an extent that,
que la
that
catastrophe
this is
soit
that this
telle
is not possible.
que ce
Much
soit pas
has to
possible.
happen in order for a democratic, viable state
Il y a
um,
beaucoup de choses qui
is
doivent se
established
produire
in
pour
Palestine. Fully
rétablir
recognize that.
un État palestinien
and
démocratique et
we're
viable.
committed to help work as part of that
Nous
process.
tenons
But
à
I
contribuer
wouldn't-
à
I'm
cet
not in
effort.
any way, shape, minimizing the scale of that task.
Je
But we are going back to
comprends
the fundamental principle
l'ampleur
of
de ce
self-determination and
projet.
what we can do to preserve that.
C'est un défi de taille, mais nous souhaitons y travailler de
On
concert
m'a dit
avec
que
nos alliés.
malheureusement, c'est tout le temps qu'on a pour les questions, même
Unfortunately,
s'il
that's
reste
all the
plusieurs
time
journalistes sur la
remaining
liste
for
ainsi qu'en
questions.
ligne, malgré tout. Thank
Although
you very
there
much, Prime
are many
Minister.
journalists who had other questions, but we thank you very much, Prime
Canada,
Minister.
National Press Center.
Merci beaucoup,
Ceci
Monsieur le
met
Premier ministre.
un terme à cette conférence de presse. Merci beaucoup et bonne journée.
That concludes today's press conference. Thank you and have a great day.
Purposes because it's clear sailing all the way to Fort Washington, and then you turn right and you're on an extended right base for 3-2 into Davison Army Airfield.
Great, thank you for that. And Chair, I don't have any more questions in this panel, but I want to thank all our witnesses.
Thank you. Member Inman.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to go back a little bit on the noise issue. In regard to on Route 4, is there a problem with hovering due to noise mitigation or noise concerns?
There's not a problem, sir, but that's not something typically you would do, especially under goggles over water. It would be very difficult to determine drift and position. So we would slow our airspeed, but I can't really think of a situation where I would come to a hover for traffic.
But if you're asked to hold, is that a hover?
No, sir. It'd be an orbit. I may slow back to 40 or 50 knots and pick up an orbit. If I was at golf balls proceeding northbound, it's typically a right orbit to stay over.
I apologize, sir.
Sure.
I'm not an aviator.
Okay.
What is golf balls?
Golf balls is the sewage treatment plant just north of Wilson Bridge on the right side of the river or the east side. It's 6 to 8 giant white domes that look like golf balls.
Thank you, sir.
Yes.
Just trying to be familiar for those who may not. Mr. Dressler, you mentioned earlier, you said that attitude was an issue with the military operating in the DCA. Can you expand a little bit on that?
I can. Unfortunately, around 2021, one of our members, that chief pilot of PG County, reported
Prince
George's reported that there were frequent issues with the pad aircraft. And then, of course, I've talked to you about the near miss that we had with MedStar Metro operated aircraft in 2017. And I can tell you that first heli of the Air Force, when I first got here and took this role, would land at MedStar helicopters, at heliports without any radio calls, any notification, any prior coordination, including one time last year when we couldn't land with a critically ill patient at our own hospital because they were blocking the pad.
Let me go back, Mr. Dressel. You just said because they were blocking the path. As I understood it earlier, if you're on a mission critical air ambulance, they clear the path for you, correct?
Only if you have a way to contact them, sir.
Does air traffic control not clear the path for you?
Not when no, this is when they've landed at a MedStar hospital.
Okay.
And they won't be in radio communications. They're not talking to our dispatch. So there's a general misconception of who has priority within the airspace, within the Class B and the DCA route structure. And that priority system starts at the top with the medevac in medevac status. Next would be law enforcement in a mission status, followed by VIP movements. I would probably equate that one with air response movements that occur from our Coast Guard partners who are based at DCA. And then at the bottom of the chain would be the continuity of government missions. So I realize that's not going to be a popular answer while I'm sitting at this table, but that is the perception within the community that is the case. I'd like to also mention just one other thing. There is a general aversion to Class Bravo airspace in Army aircraft. I learned this when I went through flight school, and it's a persistent culture that I think is proper, that military aircraft are not suited to participate in certain segments of the national airspace system. Military aircraft, of course, operate primarily on government facilities, government ranges, and in deployed environments. So it's really challenging to take a military aircraft and a military pilot and operate in not just a Class Delta airspace, which is a controlled tower, but a Class Bravo, meaning the busiest airports in the country. And then when you add on top a layer of massive complexity, there's no airspace in the country that's like DCA. And that takes a long time. We have one member with 7,000 flight hours just in this airspace, 38 years. We have another with 28 years and 5,000 hours. I have two pilots who've been here 28 years in medevac. And that level of experience takes a long time to build. And unfortunately, I understand the complexities of permanent change of station and all of that. But what we've lost in this environment, and speaking for my group in this case, is we've lost that cohesive tissue with our military partners, where they understand the depths of why the airspace was constructed the way it was constructed, why the routes work the way they work, who has priorities, who doesn't have priorities, and so forth. So it's all of those concepts that unfortunately lead me to make my comments about the units that just don't seem to have the full knowledge of how the airspace is constructed. And I say them regretfully.
Thank you. And I just want to clarify something since we were on the data request, that I do want to thank the Secretary's office, the acting administrator at the time, Chris Rochelot, and the general counsel at FAA for responding and providing us the information that we asked for. So some of this might be redundant, but I think the question will be asked a little bit different, and so I'm interested in your answer. FAA regulations allow DoD aircraft to turn ADSB off when performing sensitive or classified operations in the national airspace for national defense, homeland security, intelligence, or law enforcement purposes, and when transmitting ADSB out would compromise the mission or pose a safety risk to the aircraft, crew, or people and property in the air and on the ground. A memo from the Department of Army dated August 9th, 2024 outlines when ADSB out should be turned off within the national airspace. It states that air crews conducting sensitive or classified operations shall consider during pre-mission planning operating their transponder, collision avoidance, situational awareness, and other onboard systems to emit the least flight information required to meet airspace access and safety requirements. Before I continue on that, what is a local area orientation flight, Colonel DeForest?
Yes, Chairman Hamidi. The local area orientation would include several of the DC helo routes. It's characterized both north, west, and south of DCA. Predominantly is where we would focus on our orientation flights, to include Davidson Army Airfield, of course. So all inclusive of most of the helo routes in DC.
And does it contain sensitive sites? You would, let me rephrase this. The local area orientation flight would be for a new pilot or a pilot that's going to fly this route.
That is correct.
Okay. And I do want to say, if there's something you can't answer here, you should just tell me. For the local orientation flight, well, actually, let me go to how do you define training flight?
So a
Training flights are referenced.
So there could be many different types of flights. One could be a proficiency flight, those base tasks. Can you, maintain heading, airspeed, altitude, traffic pattern? The next would be a mission training flight, which would include locations that are, mission specific. So many different types of flights. So if it got near an actual location, that would be characterized as a mission training flight.
Okay, so this was basically a check ride and an NVG annual check, correct?
That is correct.
On this evening. So, and that's considered a training flight?
Yes, that would be considered a training flight.
Okay, under the Army's policy, are all local area orientation and training flights defined as sensitive or classified operations?
For this specific training flight, it included, because it was an annual proficiency, readiness examination. So we would want to include some aspect of the mission in that evaluation, and that's what the instructor pilot did.
Which is why you said, I don't know if you said it or someone else said it, and I apologize, that this flight was determined to have to be high risk, so you would have to have ADSB off.
Not necessarily a high risk flight, but would include
the mission.
Yes, Chairwoman.
Okay, so are all standardization flights or all check rides considered training flights?
So
and therefore don't have ADSB that's supposed to out on?
Not so. For example, if a instrument evaluation did not go near one of those locations, then that would be a training flight, not necessarily a mission training flight.
So for this flight, ADSB out should have been off according to your policy.
On 29 January, yes, it met all the criteria for the policy.
Okay, I'm going to hold on that and come back. Member Graham. Member Inman.
I'm going to follow up on it. On that exact line, on those missions that the MOU didn't require the ADSB out to be off, how many do you think prior to January 29th you flew where ADSB was turned on?
The exact number, I am not sure.
It's okay. It's a general 100, 12, 2,000.
I'll work with percentages, probably less than 20%.
Less than 20%. So on those 20%, and I know you probably can't break it down, but based on what we had found in the evaluation working with your team on those Lima models, in the Mike models, even if you had it turned on, would it be broadcasting ADSB out?
And what we have found through the investigation is there was an incorrect setting. Essentially, when the Lima model helicopters were upgraded with ADSB, call it a maintenance task. So during installation, those maintenance procedures, there was conflicting maintenance procedures. We have found that during this investigation, the ADSB out was not functional. But once it was identified during this investigation, we swiftly made that corrective action and distributed it to the entire Army.
Do you know how many
Fleet-wide.
beyond just your aircraft? I think there were 7 out of 8 that were not broadcasting correctly. Is that right?
I'm not familiar with the exact amount, but it was the majority of this 16 that we currently have at Davidson Army Airfield.
Do you have any idea how many other models were affected throughout the national airspace?
I'm not aware.
Could you take that as an OU to check or to let us know? I know it's not you don't have the entire national airspace, but I'm going to ask who I have right now. That's okay.
But what I would add is the Army did, issue a safety action message that was widely distributed, and we received it almost immediately once we determined, at Davidson Army Airfield there was a potential fault.
And we appreciate that. I think we were made aware of it, so thank you. Have either one of the representatives of the Army, have either one of you been in the DCA tower cab?
I have not.
Yes, sir. I've been up there a few times and I've taken pilots up there for tours.
Okay. Did you actually kind of look a little closer at what the helicopter operator, what they do and how they operate just to get familiarized?
Yes, sir. And while I was there was actually helicopters on the DC Helo routes. So we were actually able to see the calls and see the communication between the aircraft and the tower.
Did anything surprise you whenever you were in there doing that tour?
No, sir.
Mr. Allen, I guess for familiarization with the DCA, this I found to be very interesting as we read the interviews. We've been talking a lot about routes and we've talked about the river. We've talked about how it was constructed. Whenever a controller is controlling from that helicopter position, do they actually see the routes on their terminal? Are they able to know if an aircraft is within the route or not? Or the zone?
They can visually observe out the window. On the radar display, they can pull up the route map or the zone map or both maps. And a hard copy of the map is also available in the tower.
Do they ever pull them up on the radar scope itself?
Yes.
Okay. I'll go back on that one then. I apologize. It seemed like in reading a number of the interviews with the controlling staff that they spoke or talked to us about that they did not usually see or have the river indicated, nor the route overlaid on top of it. Does that seem correct, or is that just a misperception in reading the documents?
It would be controller preference to overlay the entire helicopter map if you wanted to do the routes and the zones with the items that are already depicted on there. And then in addition to that, all the data tags and stuff, it can become very cluttering. You can turn it on, turn it off, you can dim it, you can make it brighter. You can really customize it to what each controller would like to see and how they want to see it. So it would be a controller's prerogative.
What if the controller was operating in a combined environment when they were doing not only local control, but helicopter control? Would they have both up at that time?
They could if they chose to.
Okay. See, I'm open. We're close.
You weren't over. Okay, I'm going to go back to ADSB. Colonel DeForest, so the accident helicopter was capable of transmitting ADSB out. And what it was not transmitting ADSB out on the accident flight, you just talked about why. And we found, though, that the accident helicopter's transponder began to respond to Mode S interrogations near Cabin John and continued until the mid-air collision occurred. However, the actual data wasn't transmitting. In fact, the accident helicopter had not been transmitting ADSB data for 730 days. Under your policy, are aircrew permitted to switch between transponder mode or to turn on ADSB out during operations while in flight?
No, they're not.
Have you ever heard of a situation where the transponder would just start spontaneously responding to Mode S interrogations? I'm going to stop right there.
I'm not aware of any.
So I'm not asking you to speculate. Have you ever been aware of a crew member to turn it on in flight, of a crew member turning on ADSB out during flight in violation of your policy?
I'm not aware of that in flight per the policy.
Would the only way that would be come on be that somebody would have turned it on? Or is there some other way?
I believe it would probably take human interaction to turn ADSB out on in a Lima model because it's several steps.
That's what I'm going to ask you. What's the process for turning it on?
Having never flown a Lima model, I'll defer to Mr. Van Vechten behind me of what that procedure is.
Yes, turning on the ADSB out in a Lima model, you have to go through several different pages. Mode S is 2 button pushes, though.
So you would have to go through several menus.
Yes, ma'am, that's correct.
Okay. What would have occurred in this flight had the time setting been correct and had the ADSB out been on, because it was on, just not transmitting? Colonel DeForest or Mr. Van Vechten, whoever wants to answer.
For ADSB, I'm not aware of a crew member cockpit indication that ADSB.
No, I
on-
mean, what information would have been provided? In this case, if it was transmitting ADSB out, what would have been provided? What would have occurred in this situation if in fact it was operational and didn't have this setting error?
Sir, I can take that.
Yep.
On your blind spot. Hello. So if ADSB out was working, you would have had, in addition to the MODES identification, you would have had the position, the barometric altitude, the geo altitude. You would have had a velocity vector. Is that what you're asking for, ma'am?
Yes. So in this situation, had the setting been correct, because it was on, that's what it would have been provided.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Who was responsible for installing the transponders? What organization or entity, not person? If you don't know, you can get back to me.
Yeah, we'll get back to you, but it was a fielding team, just like we do all of our modification work orders for new equipment to aircraft, ma'am. And it's various groups of contractors or civilians who go to units to do this activity.
I see. So the Army contracts it out, and then a contractor would do it.
Or a civilian group could do it as well.
Okay, great. And so we found that the accident helicopter and in fact 7 other Limas from the 12th Battalion were not transmitting ADSB data because the helicopters had the incorrect time source setting programmed during installation. The setting should have been 059, but it was 153. The work order for installation that I looked at of the APX 123, APX-123 transponder contained instructions to set the time source on the RCU to the 153 setting. The work order for the installation of APX-123A, same thing, APX-123, but this one was A, transponder included instructions to set the time source to the 059 setting. Is that correct? No, I'm over.
Instruction. I don't have the instructions memorized, ma'am. We can get back to you.
Okay. Those instructions included steps for the 059, so that's the APX-123A alpha. Those instructions included steps to use a transponder test set to confirm proper functionality of ADSB, specifically that the test set received the flight ID, aircraft address, and the GPS position and altitude information. Prior to the accident, did you do any sort of checks on the ADSB to confirm that they were in fact installed correctly?
To my knowledge, we did not conduct those checks based on conflicting maintenance manuals.
And were there, prior to the accident, were there any sort of checks prior to takeoff to ensure that ADSB worked if in fact you weren't going to a mission site?
There was no procedure in place. However, every flight out of Davidson, they do that check today.
And that's what I'm about to ask you. So talked about the safety alert for a second, because you did take action with that information.
Yes, ma'am, we did immediate action.
What did you do?
Well, our maintenance OIC and working with the officer in charge,
okay,
in working alongside AMCOM and the NTSB, worked to package up essentially the language in the ASAM safety action message. And almost immediately, once that message or that procedure was established on the airfield, within a day or so, we reconfigured all aircraft at Davidson Army Airfield and had successful ADSB out checks.
So essentially a safety alert went out, to paraphrase.
That is correct.
And this is my last question on this. Will you include those checks during regular maintenance intervals in the future, or what are you doing now?
Right now, every flight is checked.
And is that 12th Battalion or Army-wide?
I can only speak for 12th Battalion.
Can anyone else speak for the rest of the
Ma'am,
Army?
I'd offer for the Army, it's assessed as a high risk if they don't have ADSB out. So it's incumbent on the unit to probably check that. Otherwise, they're going to have to say it's a high risk. But by that, I mean that if it's automatically high risk if they have ADSB installed and they don't know that it operates. If they know that it operates, then that de-escalates the risk. I mean that an 06 like Colonel DeForest doesn't have to approve every single mission that happens. So it pushes the unit to want to be in compliance.
So do you know for sure this is not?
So
that
we're
these checks-
tracking the field's compliance with ADSB out. We know it's over 95% now. The numbers probably changed since I looked at it.
The checking ADSB on?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Or yes, ma'am.
Thank you very much. Member Graham? Member Inman?
How do you test that in the field, in the wild? I'm sorry, just how would you know?
So there are test kits which you can use that are fielded to the units that were fielded along with the transponder. You can use on the ground. But another method that we've promulgated is to actually take a flight with ADSB out indicating that it's operating. And then after the flight, you can query an FAA database and see all of your fields and see if they were operating when they were supposed to do. And those instructions have been sent out.
Is that a new procedure?
The test kit is not a new procedure, but the extra details on actually querying the FAA website has been clarified recently.
So on these test kits, is that something that's done routine? Is it sent around? Do you have to request it? The Army has procedures for everything.
So test kits did not have a definitive test interval, but now that we have this policy for ADSB out compliance, it is being checked on a regular basis. I would guess anytime the transponder is serviced, which can be, 12 months, 24 months, it's going to be checked.
Okay. Mr. Fuchs, do you have the transcript, the page? Okay, well, I apologize. I've been trying to get a document pulled up, so I'll just try to read it a little bit if that's okay. And this goes back to Mr. Allen. We talked about earlier having the actual, if you will, for lack of a better term, helicopter route displayed, and that's on the STARS display, is that right?
Yeah, on the tower radar display.
And that's something that's normally done, is that correct?
If the controller chooses to display it, yes.
Okay, they choose to display, or do they normally have that up?
It's controller dependent. If somebody's new in training, they're going to have all the maps up and have them displayed so they can continue to learn and orient themselves with the arrivals and departures and the other items that are associated on the radar map. Somebody that maybe has more time at the facility may not choose to view it.
I'm just going to go to page 64, the transcript of the local controller on the night of the accident. The question was, do you have an overlay of helo routes on your tower display? Answer, yes. Or sorry. Answer, you can put the helo map on the STARS. Question, okay, was it up that day, or do you normally not have it on? Answer, normally we don't have it up. Question, is the Potomac River dictated or I think we now have it up, sorry. Cool. Yeah. Yeah, it starts at line 13. Is the Potomac River identified or depicted on the radar maps that you use? No. Isn't the Potomac River the actual map itself? Is that not the guidelines or the parameters?
You can depict the map or depict the river, I'm sorry.
So why would this controller not believe or say that you could?
I can't speak for his answer.
Okay. Colonel DeForest, for the Army, I guess, we've had a good opportunity to hear. There's been a lot of lessons learned, and I want to commend a lot of quick action, it seems like, to try to correct things across the entire NAS. What other areas that are safety items that have been identified so far that have not been corrected?
of when we look at our, risk management within the organization, you always looking to ID those hazards, come up with a corrective plan, and then assess them. To date, throughout this investigation today, I am not aware of anything, but I asked anybody in the room if they know something, please inform us. We know what we know, and we will rapidly and swiftly address them. And that's where we need help, in my opinion. But to date, throughout this investigation, our crews that are ready to go today, right now, they're as safe as we understand them to be. And I have full confidence in that.
Okay, I wasn't trying to draw you into something. I'm just trying to get an understanding. Out of the entire operating unit for PAT, what's the balance between Lima and Mike? The numbers.
So within 12th Aviation, we have 16 organic Limas, 8 organic Mikes, and then a National Guard company minus with 10 Mike models. So on the airfield, there's 34 Black Hawk helicopters.
And how many of them are Mikes versus Lima?
So within 12th Aviation, 16 are Limas, 8 are Mikes, and that's organic to 12th Aviation. And then we have an additional 10 on the airfield to supplement our mission requirements in a rotational National Guard unit. And they have 8 Mikes. So in total, there's 34 Black Hawks.
So I guess, and tell us again, which one's a better model? Which one has a better avionics, more safety features built in?
This would be, in my opinion, both a Lima and Mike are adequate for our mission.
No, sir, that wasn't the question. Which one's a better aircraft?
I've got to ask for a clarification on objection. We're talking about other airplanes not assigned to this accident, why we're discussing Mike models used for having to discuss it in another forum, but
Okay.
relevance to the accident of 29, the relevance to which.
Okay, that's fair, Brigadier General. That's fair. I'll tell you what, I'll reframe the question. PAT 25, who determined or decided it would be a Lima model or a Mike model?
That would be based on the approval level of the weekly flight schedule, and that's the battalion commander, so Army Lieutenant Colonel.
So is there any deliberation of whether or not it's a mission critical flight to determine whether it's a Lima or a Mike model flying?
And I'll defer to Mr. Van Vechten on that one.
The flights chosen for the aircraft chosen for the flights is based on the crew currency and qualification. So if you're assigned to one of the 2 Lima companies, you maintain currency in a UH-60 Lima and your evaluation will be done in a Lima, and vice versa with the Mike. There was only a few of us who maintained dual currency because we didn't want the interference going back and forth between the 2 aircrafts because they are significantly different.
Okay. See, I'm out of time, Chair.
Don't worry, we have several more rounds. 7 o'clock is not going to happen. Okay, Section 1046 of the 2019 National Defense Authorization Act prohibits the Secretary of Transportation from requiring the installation of ADSB on fighter aircraft, bomber aircraft, or other special mission aircraft owned or operated by the DoD. 2, denying or reducing air traffic control services in U.S. or international airspace to such aircraft on the basis that they are not equipped with ADSB, or 3, restricting or limiting airspace access for such aircraft on the basis of the aircraft are not equipped with ADSB. This is outlined in a memorandum of agreement between DoD and the FAA. That MOA goes through the roles and responsibilities of both parties to ensure safety in the DC airspace. The MOA is dated April 16th, 2024, which was prior to this particular accident. How often is that MOA reviewed?
I don't know the normal periodicity. I'm having a fumble here.
Yes.
Need a little more water, but we are currently have a work group reviewing that MOA as we speak.
Okay. Do you guys need more water? You're good. Okay. So is that codified or written anywhere on the how often these that MOA is evaluated or other MOA?
I don't know at this time. I would have to check back with the administrator's office to find out how often that's changed.
Understood. So you said the MOA is being updated now, is that right?
That's correct. They have a working group going to modify that MOA. In the meantime, the administrator has put out strict guidance on the National Capital Region.
Yes, thank you. And thank you for that. Excellent work. So generally, how do, and I'm going to ask you, maybe Mr. Van Vechten, maybe, I'm not sure, I might get that wrong, and Mr. Fuller, could you talk about how DoD and FAA coordinate to ensure operational safety in the DCA region and more broadly in the national airspace?
So we have military liaisons in all of our field offices. In addition, we have what they call liaisons for certain areas. And so I know that we have a lieutenant colonel based here in headquarters that I meet periodically with to discuss changes. We have a CIS operations security team that meets with the military to discuss potential missions or changes to the letter of agreements, things of that nature. At our command center, we have DoD assets embedded within our command center out in, and they coordinate mission-specific requirements or airspace challenges to alleviate weather concerns. But we are in continuous and constant contact with our DoD partners.
Okay. So I'm going to switch gears a little bit. The volume and complexity of mixed traffic requires so that's an MOA. So letters of agreement that outline specific procedures for conducting operations within the DCA Class Bravo airspace. By my count, it's 15 different sets of letters of agreement. So 15 different letters of agreement that provide different procedures for DCA Tower. There's Andrews, there's Virginia State Police, DC Metro, FBI, MedStar, Air Force, Army, 12th Aviation Battalion, DC Army, National Guard, Air Force, aerial events, Potomac Tracon and DCA Tower, National Capital Region Air Defense Facility. I could go on. How often are any of those letters of agreement revisited?
I would have to specifically reference the letter of agreement requirements within the 7210.3. I believe it's either an annual or every 2-year requirement, but I'll have to get back to you.
And what's the process for that?
It would be a local facility review. Any updates, changes would be required to be reviewed by the Mission Support Service Center and also coordinated for environmental.
So DCA Tower would do it?
Yes, correct.
And do they bump it up or they just decide?
Can you clarify?
Do they make recommendations and someone higher up decides?
No.
Makes the final decision?
The air traffic manager would be signatory to the LOA.
Okay. How does having 15 LOAs, and I'm just going to, you've got 15 LOAs. We've got, I'm just going to take a current. Air traffic control procedures. I mean, it's pretty lengthy. How does this affect workload? I mean, that's a lot.
Well,
different procedures.
So do you mean locally or in general?
I'm going to ask how it affects DCA Tower.
Okay. I'll defer.
So the having 15 LOAs is not, I would say, uncommon.
Sure.
Pre-accident, the majority of the LOAs with the helicopter users were just in reference to special VFR operations. There is several of them that do include additional items, mission requirements that they may have, but the majority of them had the same language for the special VFR requirements.
There were some differences.
Yeah,
So
there are some differences for specific units or missions.
And how do controllers, I mean, and I'm asking, and you know what, I'll ask during training tomorrow. I'll ask that during training tomorrow. Okay, Member Inman.
Thank you, Chair.
I'm assuming you okay.
Colonel Force, in regard to the PAT 25, the mission on that night, I'm going to get a little bit into your tasking in the National Capital Region. Had the crash not have occurred, what would have been the continuation of this flight? Can you walk me through to the end whenever it's finished and over?
Yeah, based on the RCOP and what we know is they were continuing Route 14 to return to Davidson Army Airfield.
And they would have been finished at that time?
To my knowledge, yes.
Okay, during the initial week of I believe in our response, the initial week, and I don't know if this is entirely factual, so please, I'm just curious. There was a discussion that you had to do evasive maneuvers as part of this checklist or check ride. Is that correct?
Evasive maneuvers that's not a mission task.
Okay, that's not part of the proficiency or the check ride?
In other Army aviation units, they can be considered, but that is not a mission task. There's no reason why we would practice, navigating a radar environment, like when we look at threat radars or surface to air threats, things of that nature, like a deploying unit overseas would do. But for evasive maneuvers, that's not a mission task within 12th Aviation.
Okay. I'm going to go back to the PAT 25 flight again. Was there anything that prohibited or required this flight to occur while commercial operations were occurring at DCA?
There was nothing commercial related that would prohibit this flight along their planned flight route.
My question, I guess, could they have done it at 2 a.m.?
Yes, I think I know where you're going on this.
Okay, I'm
They could
trying to
have.
draw you to
Yeah,
somewhere. I'm
yeah.
just saying, in these check rides and in other flights, do they have to be done while there's a push going on at DCA or while commercial activity is going on?
The broader context is our mission crews, they have to look at their duty cycle. So if the instructor pilot is on a duty line the next day, he has to be on the ground by a certain time. I don't know if he was, scheduled against a duty line the following day, but there's a very finite window where we can, based on our duty schedule, conduct training both day and night.
Is that a complicated task for your battalion?
It's a challenge, but it's sustainable. We are resourced to sustain that type of level of scheduling.
Had that flight not have occurred, let's say a weather caused that flight to delay, does it automatically get moved to the 2 days later, 1 day later? Does it fall into another cycle?
It would be based on instructor, the person being evaluated, and then aircraft availability. So I wouldn't anticipate more than a 7-day delay.
And at the time of that flight, were all your pilots still staying or current, I guess is the best way to describe it?
So for the entire battalion, certainly.
I'm not going to ask you to do the entire battalion. I'm sorry.
There's certainly, maybe a handful that would be medically grounded. Or when we look at, this is a risk conversation, non-medically grounded too. So those do occur in our unit. So nothing was out of the ordinary to me, in my opinion, based on the crew mix composition that evening.
I guess I'm going back to, was there anything leading up to this that was complicating your group to conduct their mission? Lack of parts, lack of people, transferring of positions. I'm going for a very broad concept here. And I know you've been interviewed a couple of times, so I'm just trying to get your opinion in that.
Yeah, my honest opinion, right? Month of January was significant, as in our greater mission, when we look at what we support with not only Joint Tasks National Capital Region, which is our contingency missions, COG and COOP, but also United States Army Military District of Washington. So we support national special security events. The month of January had 3, and that's a busy time for the organization to include all the weather. So the lead up, when we look my assessment across the formation was we had essentially executed 3 large events for the organization. That's not just specific to 12th Aviation Battalion. So I don't have that assessment that we were a fatigued organization. We were probably the most proficient as an organization. Now, when it looks, you look at your duty lines, that's our primary focus. When I look at 12th Aviation Battalion, their primary mission is COG and COOP, and everything else follows after that for mission priority. So we were at that time on the 29th, a very ready formation. Certainly with the loss of 3 crew members, there's a readiness impact, and we're still recovering from that.
Do you feel comfortable telling a pilot or telling a crew not to fly? Do you feel that you've got the power to say, don't go?
Absolutely, 100%.
Does your entire organization, do they carry that? And I'm looking behind you, actually.
I believe so.
So that's a true statement.
Is there any pressure from above you to say you need to be able to execute certain missions that you feel like you don't have either the equipment or the resources for?
I can't think of any specific instances where I felt pressure to execute a mission.
I'll use an example today. We requested, so Bravo Company, 12th Aviation Battalion. We have a lot of people watching right now, and we gave them the opportunity to do that. So there's others maintaining our line right now, and we know that's important. So that would be an example of knowing your people and reducing risk to the greatest extent possible.
Great, thank you. I'm going to go back to Ms. Murphy and Mr. Stowe. The helicopter routes we know have no lateral dimensions, no lines per se. Mr. Stowe, I just want to make sure I have this right. Did you say that controllers are responsible for monitoring flights to ensure they stay on the route? I just want to make sure I have it right.
I think the context would have been they would be responsible for monitoring the flight to ensure they have the appropriate separation. So whether they
Appropriate
deviate-
separation, but not deviating outside of that. Because there's no lines,
Correct.
They're not responsible for figuring out, oh, they're a little bit over in the Potomac River than where they should be.
If it impacted separation, I would expect that they would absolutely inquire as to why they may be further east or west than would be expected.
Well, what would be expected if you don't have any clear lines there?
I think it would be traffic workload situation dependent on if there's an expectation from the controller that the helicopter is at least along a general route, but if they are a half mile west, for example, that the controller would need to take action if it impacts separation.
Mr. Allen, on the Falcon replay, where in the Potomac was Pat 25? Was it on the east bank of the river? Maybe first start with what is the Falcon replay, because not everybody knows that.
The Falcon replay is the replay software program that the FAA uses to replay radar data.
Okay. So do you know where Pat 25 was on the Potomac there, on the Falcon replay?
From my recollection, Pad 25 appeared more center of the river.
More center.
Yep.
And if you are a controller who is working in the tower, you're handling 6 different flights. Actually, within 10 minutes, I counted, he was dealing with 21 different flights, helicopter and civilian aircraft. At night, can you see that there may be over a little bit more?
It's difficult due to the altitude there. They can blend in with the cityscape behind them, as well as the helicopters do not operate all of their lighting systems that are available.
So if it was a little bit over, you might not know the difference if you were looking out.
You may not.
It's nighttime.
Right.
So I'm going to ask again, whose responsibility is it to ensure you're on the east bank of the Potomac River? Controller or the pilots on board, the crew?
If you're using that as a separation standard, the controller needs to be the one to assign a heading that would put that helicopter on the east bank. In this particular instance, the controller approved visual separation for pad 25, and I would again be purely speculating.
Don't speculate.
Then there's no way for me to know how he would assume he was navigating along that bank.
And okay, I'm going to stop that one and I'll ask more tomorrow. I want to go back to Ms. Murphy. How do you do an evaluation if somebody requests a change on the route? Do you know? You're in the visual charting for FAA.
Exactly. So Aeronautical Information Services, my visual charting team, is not responsible for evaluating what air traffic control submits. We do work alongside them, and if we see something completely out of the ordinary, say an altitude that would just be impossible to fly at, we'll question. Aside from that, we really are, the Aeronautical Information Services visual charting team receives the information, we receive the data, and we chart it as requested.
Okay, so these three hotspots that were identified in an FAA November 2022 symposium, hotspot 1, JPN, Memorial Bridge transition. I think the request was to include something on the chart that said pilots use caution for runway 33 departures when DCA is in a north configuration, which this one was. Runway 1519 arrivals when a south configuration. Hotspot 2 was Haynes Point. Hotspot 3 was Joint Base Anacostia, Bowling, Route 4, power plant region, and the request was to have something on the chart that says pilots use caution for fixed wing arrivals to runway 1 and to runway 33 when DCA is in a north configuration, runway 1519 departures in a south configuration. You're not aware of these recommendations?
I am aware of those recommendations. As I mentioned earlier, in 2023, Aeronautical Information Services received the requests from the DCA Helicopter Working Group, and I believe that's where those recommendations were made. Again, we implemented all of them with the exception of the addition of hotspots due to the fact that they are not within the VFR aeronautical charting standard.
Did you offer an alternative?
I have no evidence of offering the alternative at the time. However, it is our standard operating procedure to work with air traffic whenever possible to solve problems and make the NAS safer through charting.
Okay, because I know you said they had some other route they could bring this up.
Yeah, it was the aeronautical charting meeting that Aeronautical Information Services hosts twice a year. It's our outward facing outreach so that stakeholders and aviation industry can make recommendations for the aeronautical charts.
It just sounds very bureaucratic to me. You can just go seek it somewhere else rather than perhaps you might come back and say, well, we can't do this, but we can do that.
Oh, we do, absolutely. So what we do is we'll work with them. And I think as a result of the working back and forth, we added a caution note. I don't want to misspeak and say something that I don't know about for sure, but we work with the air traffic control offices to solve and address any issues that they might have.
Can I just ask the request for, and I'm sorry, I'll be done. The request for language that said pilots use caution for fixed wing arrivals to runway 1 and to runway 33. You did that when in a north configuration?
I cannot confirm without it in front of me. Can I take an IOU?
Yeah, I don't think you did that.
Okay. I know that we added several caution notes at that time and also modified others. I just don't recall exactly which ones they were.
I'm just going to say that this is the very event that would have been that would have been the cautionary note for North configuration, fixed wing aircraft landing on runway 33. Member Inman, Member Graham, Member Inman.
I'll follow up on that. For charting, do you handle the entire United States?
My team does, yes.
Your team does. Are you aware of the special notices for LAX? I may be showing you something you haven't seen, but the LAX, have you, it's not up there, don't worry.
Okay, I don't know exactly what you're talking about,
It's
so I
okay.
can't
It's,
comment, yeah.
The reason I bring it up is we found this as an exemplar of, I know we put some, you said you put some cautions in the notice section, right? LAX currently has a special notice, a caution, says intense helicopter operations. That seems a little bit more than a caution. It actually specifically describes when operating a line parallel and 1 mile north, the 91 extension gives all of those. They need to make regular position reports when not in contact with ATC. They give additional specifics. I guess I'm curious, how does LAX already have intense helicopter operations, and it's been there for some period, and DCA, which is being described by everyone here as being one of the most complex helicopter systems in the United States, did not have one before this accident?
They did not ask for it.
But they did they not?
They asked for hot spots.
Can I?
Yeah, please.
Can I? On March 15th, 2023, the working group formed for a safety risk management panel focused on exactly that. Let me just quote what it said. These routes and zones, referring to the Baltimore-Washington helicopter route chart in the Ronald Reagan Washington National Airport ATC Tower airspace, that's what it said. These routes and zones are heavily traveled by medevac, military, law enforcement, photo missions, VIP movements, and support other special operations. In conjunction with the helicopter routes and zones, there is a high volume of fixed-wing aircraft that operate in the immediate vicinity of the published routes and zones. The current helicopter routes and zones have changed very little since 1999, while airlines, aircraft types, approaches, volume, complexity, crews, and many other factors have evolved. The Baltimore-Washington helicopter route structure has not. With the current route zone structure, helicopter operations are occurring in a proximity that has triggered safety events. These events have been trending in the wrong direction and increasing year over year. And then they recommended action. But are we really going to say, well, they didn't do enough? I'm not looking for an answer right now because honestly, I don't get it. Every sign was there that there was a safety risk and the tower was telling you that. Yet you know what FAA did? After the accident occurred, you transferred out the air traffic manager, 2 assistant general managers, and the support, staff support manager or support person. I'm sorry, I don't know the exact title, but what you did is you transferred people out instead of taking ownership over the fact that everybody in FAA in the tower was saying there was a problem. But you guys are pointing out, well, our bureaucratic process, somebody should have brought it up at some other symposium. Are you kidding me? 67 people are dead. How do you explain that? Our bureaucratic process? Do you know, we actually added up how many steps it takes to get from the tower to headquarters to figure out, and we ran all sorts of scenarios, how many steps it takes to get a policy change. 21 steps. Fix it. Do better. Member Inman.
I don't know if that was my time or yours, but I don't think it doesn't matter. We're here for a different reason. I'm going to go back to, actually, I'm going to read something. as part of this process from the FAA, did you go back and look at the ASRS reports around DCA?
We did do an evaluation of the ADSAP safety reports and the ASRS reports around DCA, correct?
For the ASRS, was anything troubling for you in looking through those reviews?
We noticed there were a few indications of helicopter conflicts with fixed wing aircraft. They weren't in the vicinity of helicopter route 4 and runway 33 primarily.
This one was an oldie but a goodie, but it just tells you, I think it came from 2013. It's number 1127815. This is where an actual controller agreed and said he was describing a conflict event involving a helicopter operating a photo mission and an air carrier arrival. The reporter suggesting improved and standardized procedures for handling helicopter photo operations. But in the narrative, one of your own air traffic controllers says, our helicopter operation is an abomination of the picture of safe aircraft movement. Do those trouble you?
Any report that mentions an abnormality of safety is going to trouble me.
So what action gets taken after something like that?
I can't speak to what happened in 2013, but
I'm saying anytime. I'm just using this one as probably the best example because it's not like this problem just popped up.
so if it's an internal report to the facility, they have a local safety council that can take immediate action within their facility. It's a management and union representation. If they need additional support from external, you have district resources, QC managers, support specialists. If it's something that requires more, we've got director level support and service centers for DCA would be Atlanta. For the other areas, it'd be in Fort Worth or Seattle. But we do have support to make sure that any immediate concerns we adjudicate and address.
What was, you said you looked at the ATSAP in regard to this incident. Since we have not seen that, what trends did you find in the ATSAP data? Because that's held internally and hasn't been shared with us on this. Again, what did you see in that you can disclose?
We didn't find any additional trends that will report in the specific operations around helicopter route 4 and runway 33. There was just no data, no reports that suggested this was something we missed. Again, I think some of our military counterparts have indicated we don't utilize runway 33 very much for our operations. And so we just did not have enough safety data that indicated that was an outlier.
You don't use, so if I understand it correctly, you don't use runway 33 very often, is that right?
That's correct. It's about 5% of the operations at DCA and North Flow.
And why is runway 33 then used?
It is an available runway, and sometimes the controllers may use it to resolve an overtake situation on runway 11 just to offload some traffic.
So as traffic increases, they need an exhaust way to clear traffic out, is that right?
It may not be an increase in traffic, it may just be a slower aircraft in front.
Okay, I'm gonna pause on that. I think I may go back to it tomorrow. Go ahead.
Well, well, before I go on to the totally different topic, Colonel DeForest, and we're going to go into this in the panel 5, but I don't even know if you're in panel 5. Today's Wednesday. This 2 days from now.
I am.
You are? Okay. Well, I'm just going to ask while we're here. Do you, in order for you to get this information of ATC has raised concerns, apparently several times, you'd have to ask FAA, correct? Or FAA would have to notify you.
That is correct. And we have an agency, the United States Army Aeronautical Services Agency, that would provide that to us. And
go ahead. I'm sorry.
We do receive what we call updates to the field. So within our brigade, we have an airfield division that does regular and routine interaction with the FAA. These types of reports that we're discussing right now, they're not pushed to us. Let's just call it that.
And I know I saw you in some of the minutes and not you, the battalion in 2019, 2020. The hotspots and the like that were put forward by Tower. Was this investigation the first time you learned of that?
For me, since being in this unit since August, yes, this is the first time.
How about anybody else in your unit? Were they aware?
I would hope
That you know of.
without asking Mr. Van Vechten behind me, who was here 2 years prior to me at least.
Mr.
So-
Van Vechten, how about you?
No, ma'am, I was not aware.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to switch gears for a second. I'd apologize, but I'm not going to. There are 10,000s of pages in the docket, so I have more questions. But I'm going to switch gears, Colonel DeForest and Mr. Van Vechten. For pilots coming into the Army Aviation Brigade, what experience or background in aviation are you seeing compared to maybe years ago?
So this is when we look at flight hours.
Flight hours, sorry.
aggregate, it's less than it was years ago, and this is something Army Aviation is tackling.
Yeah, I was a little bit concerned. I mean, a little bit surprised, sorry. When I was reading the transcripts, it seemed that I would have expected the people we interviewed would have had more hours than they currently have. It seemed kind of low. In fact, Colonel DeForest, you mentioned in your interview that you asked Mr. Van Vechten, sorry, talking about you, what the greatest challenge is. And you said, I think, my opinion, consistent across a lot of Army aviation units is what we're seeing is that composite cockpit time steadily going down and down and down. So he meaning Mr. Van Vechten, used the example about 5 years ago, we would have had thousands and thousands of hours cockpit. Now we have hundreds and hundreds of hours cockpit, and that is usually, I've heard that before in other organizations. I experienced it when I was in USA PAT as a battalion commander, same, very similar challenge. It's the aggregate flight hour experience across aviation formations is steadily decreasing. Is that one of your biggest challenges, I would think?
Absolutely.
Just like the airlines are probably experiencing now. So I want to talk about currency. Numerous 12th Battalion personnel said that we interviewed, that they are pushing to get flight hours every year. Is it 60 hours every year? I'm sorry.
It's 48 hours every
48.
semi-annual, so 96 annually, ma'am.
96 annually. And is that something you're seeing? I mean, numerous personnel said that they were pushing to get the minimum hours. Are you aware of that?
I will comment on that, ma'am. It depends on the individual. The more qualifications you have, the more opportunity you have to fly. So if you're an instructor pilot, you're probably going to fly more than your typical basic co-pilot because you can do evaluations, you can do proficiency flight evaluations, and you can also do missions.
How about staff officers?
So staff officers has historically been challenging to try to find time to get the experience. Sometimes they'll get their currency, but currency doesn't always equal proficiency. So that is a challenge to maintain proficiency in the aircraft and not just currency.
And why is that? For people who are not familiar with what a staff officer's responsibilities are compared to them getting flight time.
So the way that I'd explain that, ma'am, I explained to someone earlier between a commissioned officer, a captain, lieutenant, major, colonel versus a warrant officer. A commissioned officer is a officer who happens to be a pilot. I'm a pilot who happens to be an officer. So my primary focus is aviation. I focus in one specific area, which is aviation. Commissioned officers, they must be have more skill and knowledge across a wider band of topics because they will typically do those staff positions where warrant officers will stay in the flight company longer and perform and be the continuity for the unit.
Thank you so much. Member Graham? Member Inman? Sure. Continuing on, what kind of training did pilots who were joining the 12th Aviation Battalion receive from the Army for operating within the DCA airspace?
So once they arrive, ma'am, prior to their first flight, they must complete the FAA DC Special Flight Rules Area training online, and then the academic, including the reading card file, and then a local area orientation covering all the local area.
Thank you. And in flight school, what model of aircraft are they trained on?
They now begin on the UH-72 Lakota for primary contact and then move on to the instrument phase. They fly the basic warrior skills, BWS, in a UH-72 Lakota, where they learn basic land navigation from an aircraft. And then they move on to their advanced airframe, either the AH-64, the CH-47 Chinook, or the UH-60 Mike Black Hawk.
And those are more advanced than the Lima.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, so you go through flight school on these more advanced aircraft. You don't have a lot of experience in aviation. Let's say you're new. And you go through school in these advanced aircraft, you learn to fly, and then you come to the 12th Battalion and you fly the Lima. So you basically fly steam gauges.
Yes, that's correct. And that challenge is not unique to 12th Aviation Battalion and TAB. Most units, most combat aviation brigades across the fleet have at least one UH-60 Lima company, so that we conduct the training support package to qualify that new pilot in that aircraft that they've never flown before.
And does that present challenges that and just to ask, do you have pilots that only fly Mike or only fly Lima?
Yes, we do. In TAB specifically, there were only a few people that would go back and forth because of the significant differences.
Okay. And so if you were trained on the Mike, you go to the Lima, maybe talk about some of the challenges that presents.
Well, the UH-60 Mike has a fully coupled flight director, also known as autopilot. So it maintains an altitude, a heading, and an airspeed. It'll do a fully coupled ILS. It can track to a VOR while maintaining altitude and airspeed. The UH-60 Lima has a force trim system, which is kind of like a force gradient that holds the cyclic, the stick in place. And then the collective has a friction that you can turn on or off, which will hold the collective in position.
On the Mike model?
On the Lima.
Oh, on the Lima model.
The Mike model has a full autopilot.
Full autopilot. Okay. And you're kind of getting to where I'm going. Some of personnel from the 12th Battalion that we interviewed said there were some differences in managing power and pitch.
I would say the power management aspect is negligible between the UH-60 Lima and the UH-60 Mike. Pitch, I would say, is more significant. If I input an altitude and an airspeed to hold in the UH-60 Mike, it's going to hold it as best as it can. There are external factors like winds and turbulence and stuff like that. But the UH-60 Lima is 100% pilot controlled. So much more of the focus is dedicated to maintaining altitude, airspeed, and heading.
So if I'm just going to read you this quote, this was a quote from one of the personnel interviewed. To maintain exactly 200 feet in a Lima is quite different, where in a Mike model, I can roll in, rad out, hold to the water at 200 feet or 199, and the Mike model will do that, where a Lima, maintaining at exactly 200 feet over the water is challenging. Would you agree with that?
Yes, I would agree.
Why?
Well, first, I wouldn't personally in a Mike, I wouldn't couple to radar altitude over the water.
Yeah.
There's just too many variances with the signal bouncing off of different structures, and you're going over bridges and stuff like that. So I would couple to typically 180 feet on the UH-60 Mike, which is right near the max for the 200. Where in a UH-60 Lima, you have to kind of set the collective and use the friction lock, which is on the right seat only, on the right side of the collective, and kind of friction it down to maintain the altitude, which requires the pilot to come in the cockpit more often to look at their altitude.
Thank you very much. Member Graham? Member Inman? Okay. So we talked about the challenge to maintain proficiency. We talked about the officers. How about the availability for getting more hours? How about the availability of aircraft resources? We did interview quite a bit of personnel saying it's an aging fleet. A lot of times they're in maintenance. Is that, do you know, do you agree that that presents some difficulty?
The difference between Lima and Mike is at 12th Aviation, the Limas are more maintenance intensive. Yes.
Yeah. Do you want all mics? Do you want to get rid of the Limas? Oh, come on. This is this is like a softball.
Standardization. I seek standardization and safety. And
Well, do you want standardization of all Limas?
from a cost, blade time, a mic model, as I understand, in the unit that I command, yes, a mic model is less expensive. And having a pure fleet would save time and money.
Thank you. I think that was echoed by everyone that was interviewed, is they would rather have a one model and being the mic model. I'll do what I can to help you out in appropriations, only if we're fully funded. Okay. How are crew trained on the approaches to DCA runways? How are they trained, for example, on a circling to 3-3 approach?
There's no training that takes place for that, ma'am. For rotary wing aircraft, we don't train fixed wing procedures.
I'm sorry, I don't mean, how are they trained in knowing that a fixed wing aircraft would do that?
That would have to be through personal knowledge when you're given a circle to land, but that's not something typically we would discuss as helicopter pilots about fixed wing procedures. For instance, I've heard pilots be cleared for the Mount Vernon visual. I'm not familiar with that, but I assume they come in from Mount Vernon and then fly a visual approach. But we don't specifically train helicopter procedures or airplane procedures, excuse me.
I guess what I'm wondering is, if you're flying a helicopter, you're on the Potomac, how are you trained to know that a fixed wing aircraft would circle to runway 33 and what that flight path would be?
You'd have to kind of interpolate based on when you initially saw the aircraft, which in this case was at Wilson Bridge. If I heard tower say you're cleared circle to land runway 33, you'd have to kind of visually find the aircraft when it's circling to land, which would be very difficult under goggles.
So that's not part of their
No, ma'am, that's not.
training?
No.
Okay. Did you have any knowledge, was it a surprise to you that there was a max of 75 feet vertical separation at the east bank of the Potomac, where the glide slope for 33?
Yes, ma'am, that was shocking. Based on the hundreds and hundreds of hours I flew in this area, like I said, I did not think that was allowed for a helicopter to be on that route while landing runway 3315.
And this might not be a fair question, and you're welcome to get back to me, but if you did know that before, how would that have changed your operations?
If I knew that there was the vertical separation,
75 feet.
I would have told pilots not to cross the center line of the approach path until you saw the aircraft either take off or land.
Thank you very much. Member Inman. Well, first, Member Graham. Member Inman.
I just want to make sure we've got the ability, go as long as we need to, but that we can recall a couple of these witnesses on Friday or whenever we want to.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. Oh, we only went 10 minutes over. Do you all have additional questions that you'd like to follow up on? Feel
Yes.
free. We are here.
Yes, ma'am.
This is your time
There
to
are a
get all
coup-
your questions, so go for it.
There are a couple questions.
Figured that out. Okay, I just have a few clarifying questions because I want to make sure we are able to all leave on the same page and that we document things correctly and have a full understanding. So I know we've danced around these things a good bit, so I apologize for rehashing. But to understand the VFR helicopter routes, if I understand what I've gleaned here today, helicopter routes they have no lateral boundaries, they are suggestive in nature, or they are suggestive, and the altitudes that are published with them are suggestive, not mandatory. And helicopter routes are requested normally by air traffic managers at facilities that feel they need or desire helicopter routes to move traffic. Can I ask you, Mr. Allen, you had said earlier when you responded to a question about the helicopter flying in altitude, you expected them to be at the published altitude that was listed on the helicopter route chart. Is that correct?
Correct.
And do you feel that that is the controllers, the control workforce at DCA ATC, that's how they would understand it as well?
Correct.
Did it surprise you to hear that these altitudes are suggestive in nature, barring an actual additional instruction from air traffic control?
It didn't surprise me because it's a VFR chart, but having the facility knowledge, knowing that the operators, I feel, they believe that they're a hardened altitude as well as the controllers do. I see both sides of it.
Okay. So in reality, at the end of the day, the whole route is suggestive in nature, meaning if the air traffic control issued no additional instruction or restriction when they approved them to fly the route, if they flew above the route, below the route, above or below the published altitude, or outside, left or right of what the drawn line is, there's no violation, correct? FAA?
It would depend on the specific instruction, whether there was a violation in 91-123 or any individual clearance. And I think that's why earlier I was specifying it may be very situationally dependent.
Wow, I was hoping for clarification. So
I think
I don't want to misquote something later is really the deal. I want to make sure that have a very clear understanding. If a helicopter checks in and says, I want to fly from A to B via that helicopter route, and the controller says approved, the helicopter, of course, has to follow any other normal rules within the airspace they're flying and all of that. But from the standpoint of the helicopter route itself, if he drifts left or right of the route, or if he goes above or below that altitude, he's in no violation of not flying that route. And unless air traffic control gave him a restriction along with it, like approved, maintain at or below 200. Now he has a restriction from air traffic control that is a positive control, right?
In that scenario, yes, I believe that is accurate.
Okay. All right.
Mr. Soper, can I say one quick thing on that?
Yes, absolutely.
That is not the helicopter operator's understanding.
Can you express what it is from your group or from yourself?
Absolutely. When you check in Class Bravo airspace and you ask for, what the first call would be, say request, right. And then I provide that request and I say what my routes or my zones or both. And prior to about 2 months ago, we were not using altitudes in our initial requests. However, As you said, when you receive approved, that's approved as requested. And those limits, the chart is as depicted. The lines are as depicted and the altitudes are as noted. That is all of our understanding. So I can't speak to where the misunderstanding comes from. I understand the vague term of it's not regulatory, but we don't fly like that. The tower controllers approved our request, or they might deny our request and give us something else. But if it's approved as requested, we follow exactly what the chart says.
Well, that's helpful and confusing. So I just I'm in that same struggle bus right now, because I feel like if these routes are requested by air traffic managers to move traffic through their airspace under a certain criteria, they assign these altitudes. They're not arbitrary. There's a reason they want them at or below 200. There's a reason they want them at or below 1,000. Various reasons, obviously. But as an air traffic controller, I'll be honest with you, I'm learning something new here today I didn't understand, because I did assume if I was working in a control facility and they check in, I put them on that route, I'm expecting them to maintain that altitude. I do understand not having a lateral boundary, but I was unclear on the altitude. I don't think we need to go any further down it today. I think I've got a good grasp on probably what needs to be discussed on this one. So I'd like to move to a second one. Mr. Van Vechten, this one's for you. You have mentioned a couple of times now the perception that it was a rule, essentially, that you would not cross the final approach course of runway 33 if there's traffic inbound to that runway. Where do you know where you got that perception, or where that came from? Did somebody tell you that? Was it part of a group you went to? Did somebody instruct you with that on air, or how did that work?
Based on my experience in every single time that I saw traffic landing 1533, that I was told to hold at the two locations. And it was just like to clarify a little bit what you said earlier. So is it under your assumption, sir, that if I'm at 201 feet, it's a violation then?
Well, I'm not saying air traffic's in the world of violating. I mean, from that standpoint, no. I just meant there's an expectation, as Mr. Allen mentioned, that you're going to maintain the published altitude on there. If you pop up above for a second, like he said, you're going to watch that for a second, because you're a helicopter. You're maintaining clear of other stuff and everything else too, and that's a very low altitude. If you come up a little bit and then you come back down, they're probably not going to say anything. If you're up at 400 though, and they see you clicking along at 400 for a few miles, they're probably going to say something, right?
Yes.
Or there's an assumption they might. So not what you said, right? So this how long would you say that has occurred a lot? Have you had a lot of instances where you were actually flying that route with aircraft landing runway 33, or has that only been a handful of times, or what's the frequency for you?
Again, it's only a handful of times because of the large percentage that lands 119. So it wasn't that often, but 100% of the time I was not allowed to cross.
Okay. And Clark, you mentioned earlier that's more of a technique that was taught at one time by some people at DCA. Is that correct, at the airport?
Correct.
And it has, to the best of my knowledge, I think we discussed it while we were on site, that was never an actual procedure that they were required to hold aircraft short when they had an aircraft on Route 4 and an aircraft landing 33. Is that correct?
It was technique only.
Yeah, it was technique always. And then some people taught that, some people didn't. And I know there was discussion that somebody always did it that way. So I was just kind of curious, because when we started talking about that was a rule, it was confusing. So I wanted to be sure where you got that. So just to be clear, if you were trucking along on Route 4 going southbound and you've passed Haynes Point and all that, and then you look out and you realize, oh, there is an aircraft turning in. It looks like he's turning inbound to 33. Would you turn around and go to the golf balls, or what would you do? Or would you just query air traffic?
I would make an immediate left turn if I was south of Haynes Point, because I know that's going to keep me clear of the approach path.
So from an air traffic control standpoint, would that bother you if you've cleared this guy, or you've approved this guy to fly Route 4, and you're working your traffic, and all of a sudden you see him turn off of Route 4 somewhere else? would that be alarming to you at all?
Yes, but he's seen and avoiding, so.
No, I understand that. I just meant though that
I would want him to do that.
you'd probably query him, I would assume,
Yes.
at that point. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. I think I understand that part now. And the last one was earlier we were talking about the prevalence of use of runway 33 and how it was only 5% of the use when they're in a north configuration. I feel like that might be a deceiving metric. And I would like this is for Mr. Fuller and for Mr. Allen to respond to. But if I understand, that metric seems to be based on traffic count. So we're in a north configuration, only 5% of the operations actually land 3-3 when we're in that north configuration. That's a low number, or less than 5, whatever that number was. But I think the metric that's concerning for us is it's the amount of times when they're in a north configuration that runway 33 is used to offload traffic is going to be a bigger number. And what I mean by that is, I feel like it is based on the stuff we've looked at. And Mr. Allen, you can correct me if I'm wrong on this. When I say that, I'm saying if you had 100 days that you were in a north operation, how many times when you're in a north operation do you guys utilize runway 33 at some point to be able to offload aircraft for spacing, to get departures out or whatever?
It's a controller's prerogative, but I would be, if you took 100 days, a majority of the time.
And that's the metric that's probably, I would hate to just glean over that as not a problem because it's only 5% of the operations. I would think that if we're doing that, let's just say 70% of the time we're in a north operation, we're having to utilize 3-3 to offload traffic in order to do that. You're injecting risk 70% of the time you're in a north operation whenever you have to do that. I mean, type of thing. I may have got that a little mixed around, but essentially I just felt like that metric was there. And just to be clear, Mr. Fuller, the number that you did give, that was traffic count, right? Maybe you already, because I don't want to misquote that metric either.
Well, no, that's correct, but that is the only metric that would really apply. I don't really understand the differentiation of if it's every day. If we're only using it 5% every day, it's still 5%. And I think that would apply to every airport in the NAS. We offload to parallel runways or intersecting runways to resolve conflicts or traffic situations or to increase capacity. It's not an uncommon thing to utilize your additional runway for traffic management.
Okay, I think it's more than just a numbers thing to me, but I'll have to articulate that in writing later. So, but I do think I understand it now. So that's all I needed to clarify. That's all I got.
I think it was Colonel DeForest that mentioned during our investigation, 7 of the 8 Limas at the 12th Battalion stopped broadcasting ADSB after installation of the APX 123 Alpha transponder. 6 of those Limas stopped transmitting ADSB about 2 to 8 months after installation of the APX 123 Alpha transponder. And we found the time source setting was incorrect for those. Would that suggest the time source setting was changed at some point between the initial installation when it was successfully radiating ADSB for about 2 to 8 months until when it stopped?
I'd be unaware if it was manipulated or changed willingly.
Mr. Van Vechten, do you have anything to add to that?
No, sir, I'm unaware as well.
Do the UH-60M helicopters also have the APX 123 Alpha transponder?
Yes, they do.
And on the APX 123 Alpha transponder, the ADSB function is coupled to Mode S. Is that correct?
It's an extension of the Mode S function.
So by turning on Mode S, if the ADSB squitter setting was on, it would automatically start radiating ADSB as well?
I'm not familiar with the pilot interface, but typically it does the same functionally in this airspace. So I don't see a reason you would just do Mode S or just do ADSB out.
At the Army Aviation Brigade, prior to flight, under what circumstances would a crew set up a transponder to transmit only Mode S, but not ADSB? In essence, you would have the ADSB squitter setting off, but you would turn on Mode S.
So from a technical perspective, I'll defer to Colonel DeForest and Mr. Mvectin for operational, but from a technical perspective, as you're probably aware, Mode S functioning in this airspace through multilateration gives the same position information and barometric altitude information to air traffic control and TCAS. So from an operational security perspective, you're transmitting the same information at the same frequency, whether you're doing Mode S or ADSB out.
Okay. And
one thing, sir, from an operational standpoint, it is possible that the Mode S was inadvertently turned on with the interface through the GPS. It could be very easy to accidentally turn on Mode S. Accidentally turning on Mode ADSB is much more difficult.
That leads me to the next question I had was that Colonel DeForest had mentioned that it's with the policy of not changing the transponder modes during flight, that it would take about 20 steps or so to turn on specifically ADSB. Is that correct? But for Mode S, it would only take 2 presses of a button on the transponder control unit.
That's correct.
And so if Mode S is tied to ADSB, my understanding is that the ADSB squitter setting is saved when the transponder is powered down. And so if the ADSB squitter setting is on, and by turning on Mode S, it would automatically start radiating ADSB as well. If it only takes 2 button presses to turn on Mode S and to turn off Mode S, why limit a crew from turning on Mode S for more awareness with ADSB out when you get to a busy airspace like near DCA? If it's only 2 button presses versus the 20 just to turn off the squitter setting, if you could just turn it off by turning Mode S off and on.
So for the flight on the 29th, it included mission locations. So they're going to go through there as they would on a mission line. So that step would be followed.
But from a pilot's perspective, would that be difficult to turn on Mode S? In terms of the policy, is that too constraining if it only takes 2 steps to turn it on and turn it off in flight?
No, that wouldn't be difficult.
And just to clarify, what you're asking is turning on Mode S in flight is less taxing on the pilot or air crew than turning on ADSB out on in a Lima model.
Correct. And since the Mode S is tied to ADSB on this transponder and the setting saves with the power down of the transponder, i.e. you don't have to go on to turn the squitter setting on each time. If you're not using Mode S while flying to sensitive locations anyways, you could theoretically change the Mode S setting or the transponder setting, sorry, to turn on and radiate Mode S and ADSB once you've left the area with the secure locations. But with policy though, prohibiting changing the transponder setting in flight, you would by policy limit a pilot from turning on that squitter setting and Mode S.
Thank you. No, I just wanted to make sure that clarification was made. Thanks.
Thank you.
Mr. McKinney?
Yes, Mr. Van Vechten, I have one follow-up question to what you mentioned. You said it would be easy to inadvertently turn on the Mode S when switching GPS. Could you expand on that comment, please?
Yeah, I was hoping you wouldn't catch that. I misspoke a little earlier. I said GPS instead of transponder. Good catch.
Okay, thank you.
Chairwoman Hamady, I believe that's all the follow-up questions we have.
Thank you. Can I forgot to ask one question. Mr. Allen, you said the tower So I imagine the CDTI display, I don't know, I'm not a controller. So in the tower, ADSB, it's ADSB capable, but you don't have ADSB on. Like you're not getting ADSB information?
What I was referring to is on the radar display, it can annotate if the system is receiving ADSB data or not. And that's not typically turned on.
Can I help clarify?
Yeah.
So ADSB data may go into part of what's interrogated for the purpose of creating a fused radar target. However, there's no requirement for air traffic controllers to specifically monitor the status of ADSB out. It wouldn't impact separation standards, for example, so they're not required to monitor it.
Okay, thank you. Did you want to follow up or no? You've got, okay, great.
And sorry, there's one caveat. I'd have to get it to you in the 65 in the event of certain radar outage feeding ASD, but I can provide you that. It wouldn't, I think, have been the case in this instance.
Okay, thank you. So that concludes panel 2 and day 1 of this investigative hearing. On behalf of my fellow board members and the NTSB staff, we extend our appreciation to the participants in this hearing. Before we close, I do want to ask Mr. Baranowski to please review any new exhibits, and I know we have a few from the Army that were admitted during this hearing.
We can't hear him.
That's-
Step up, step up.
I'm going to repeat it.
Okay.
We got it. Sorry, can you repeat that?
It was the 2017 ESAP report filed on MedStar.
Okay, so for the Army, 2017 ASAP report filed by MedStar. Is that correct? Okay, thank you. All right, the record will remain open for the addition of exhibits admitted during the hearing. So the transcript will be made available to the parties and witnesses electronically within 7 days of the completion of the hearing. Any corrections to the transcript must be sent to the hearing officer by September 1st, 2025. As a safety agency, we take fatigue very seriously, so we ask that the Board of Inquiry and parties to please refrain from contacting NTSB staff from now until 7 a.m. tomorrow. If you have questions or need assistance in the meantime, please reach out to the Office of Aviation Safety Director, Tim LeBaron, the Deputy Director, Dave Helson, or the Deputy Managing Director for Investigations, Brian Curtis. To NTSB staff, you did an excellent job today. Thank you. So see everyone tomorrow at 9 a.m. We stand adjourned. Yeah, I mean, I'm tired and I have other stuff.
may submit comments on the hearing. Per 49 CFR Section 845.13, following
Bonjour et bienvenue au Théâtre national de la presse. Je suis Boris Proulx, vice-président de la Tribune de la presse et journaliste au devoir. Et bienvenue à cette conférence de presse. Au podium, Mark Carney, le Premier ministre du Canada, ainsi qu'Anita Anand, la ministre des Affaires étrangères du Canada. After a few remarks, we'll go to the question period.
Après
First
quelques remarques,
in the
nous
room
passerons
and
aux
then
questions
on
des
Zoom.
journalistes à la
On
fois
that, Prime
en
Minister, you
présentiel
have the
et
floor.
ensuite sur Zoom. Monsieur le Premier ministre, vous avez la parole.
Earlier today, I convened a cabinet meeting
Plus tôt
to
aujourd'hui,
do
j'ai
two things. One, provide
convoqué
an
mon
update on the
cabinet
state of negotiations
pour
with the
leur
United
faire un
States,
état des
and
lieux des
secondly, to
négociations avec
discuss the
les
situation
États-Unis et
in the
pour
Middle East.
discuter de la situation au
With respect
Proche-Orient.
to the first, the trade
Au
negotiations
sujet
with the
de
U.S.,
la première question,
as
les
you know, we're
négociations
seeking the
commerciales
best
avec
deal
les
for
États-Unis.
Canadians.
Nous
We have
sommes à
not
la
yet
recherche
reached
du
that
meilleur
deal.
accord avec les
Negotiations
États-Unis.
will
On n'y est pas
continue
encore. Les
until we do.
négociations vont se
Mr.
poursuivre
LeBlanc
jusqu'à ce
and
qu'on y
senior
arrive.
officials
Le
will
ministre
remain in
Leblanc
Washington
et des hauts fonctionnaires
in
seront
pursuit
à
of that.
Washington pour
The focus
arriver à
of
cette
our
fin.
meeting was really the Middle East.
L'objectif de la réunion
The level
d'aujourd'hui,
of
c'est le
human suffering
Proche-Orient.
in Gaza
La
is
souffrance
intolerable,
humaine à
and
Gaza
it's
est
rapidly
intolérable
deteriorating.
et la situation se détériore
Des dizaines
rapidement.
de milliers de Palestiniens ont été
Tens of
tués.
thousands of Palestinians
Des
have been
milliers
killed.
d'autres sont au bord
Thousands
de la
more are
famine.
on the brink of famine.
Le Canada condamne le fait que le
Canada
gouvernement
condemns the
israélien a
fact that the
laissé la
Israeli
catastrophe
government
se
has let the
détériorer
situation
à Gaza.
deteriorate in Gaza to
En
this
tant que
extent.
membre fondateur des Nations
We
Unies
are a
et de
founding
l'OTAN,
member of
le
both the
Canada est
United Nations
parmi les
and of
premiers à
NATO.
défendre la paix
As such,
et
Canada
de
is
la
always among the
sécurité
first to stand
dans le
to
monde.
defend peace and
Nous
security
avons le
around the world.
devoir de faire
It is
respecter les
our
droits
duty
de la
to ensure
personne
that human
à
rights are
l'international
upheld abroad.
et de favoriser la paix et la
We also
sécurité
have a
au
duty to
pays
promote peace and safety
et
in
à l'étranger.
Canada and around the world.
Earlier this week, the Minister of Foreign Affairs representing Canada
Cette semaine, la
at the
ministre des
UN
Affaires
high-level conference
étrangères
on
a
a two-state
représenté le Canada
solution in New
à
York.
une réunion de haut niveau des Nations
In recent
Unies
days,
sur
I've
la
spoken with
solution à
our
deux
allies,
États.
including President
Récemment, j'ai
Macron,
parlé avec
Prime
nos
Minister
alliés,
Starmer,
le Premier
President
ministre
von der Leyen.
Macron, le Premier ministre
Also had a
Starmer,
number of discussions with our
la
ambassador
Première
to the
ministre
United
von der
Nations to operate.
Leyen, ainsi qu'un grand nombre de nos partenaires.
International cooperation is
La
essential to
coopération
securing
internationale est essentielle
lasting peace
pour
and
qu'on arrive
stability
à
in the
une
Middle
paix
East. And Canada
durable au Proche-Orient.
will do its best to help
Le
lead
Canada
that effort.
va faire de son mieux pour qu'on y arrive.
Canada has long been committed
Le Canada
to a
tient depuis
two-state
longtemps à
solution.
une solution à deux États.
An independent, viable, and sovereign Palestinian state
Un État
living
palestinien
side
indépendant
by
et
side
souverain qui
with the
est
state of
vit
Israel
aux
in
côtés
peace and
d'Israël
security.
dans la paix et la sécurité.
For decades, it was
Pendant
hoped
des
that this
décennies,
outcome would be
on
achieved as
espérait
part of a peace process
que
built
le
around a
processus de
negotiated
paix
settlement
permettrait d'arriver
between
à
the
cette
Israeli
fin
government and the
avec un
Palestinian
accord
Authority.
négocié entre l'État israélien et
Regrettably,
l'autorité palestinienne.
this approach
Malheureusement,
is no longer tenable.
cette approche n'est plus tenable.
Prospects for a two-state solution
Les
have been
perspectives
steadily and gravely
d'une
eroded,
solution à deux États
including by
se sont
the
étiolées
pervasive threat of Hamas terrorism
à
to
cause
Israel
de la
and its
menace
people,
du Hamas contre
culminating in
Israël
the
et sa
heinous
population,
attack
y
of October
compris
7th,
les attaques haineuses du 7
2023.
octobre
The
2023.
terrorist organization Hamas's long-standing violent
L'organisation
rejection of
terroriste,
Israel's
le
right to
Hamas,
exist
a longtemps violé
and
le
its
droit
rejection of a two-state
d'Israël
solution.
d'exister et a rejeté la solution à deux États.
The accelerated settlement building across the West Bank and East Jerusalem,
Les colonisations en
all
Cisjordanie
the while
et dans
while settler
Jérusalem
violence against
Est
Palestinians has soared, has also
et
undermined
la
the process.
violence contre les
As have
Palestiniens ont
actions
également
such as the
miné
E1
le
settlement
processus
plan
de paix.
and this month's vote
C'est sans
by the
parler
Knesset
du
calling for the
plan
annexation
E1
of the
et
West Bank
le vote de la Knesset
and the ongoing
d'annexer
failure of the Israeli government to prevent the rapidly
d'annexer la
deteriorating
Palestine.
humanitarian disaster in Gaza.
La
with
catastrophe
impeded access
humanitaire
to
se
food and other
détériore
essential
à
humanitarian
Gaza.
supplies.
La population n'a
The
pas
deepening
l'accès
suffering of
nécessaire
civilians leaves
aux
no room
denrées
for delay in
alimentaires.
coordinated international action
D'où
to support peace,
l'importance
security, and the
d'une
dignity
action
of human life.
concertée pour protéger la dignité
Preserving a
humaine.
two-state solution means standing with
Une
all
solution à
people who
deux États,
choose peace over violence
c'est
or
de
terrorism,
parler
means
aux
honoring
côtés de ceux qui
their
défendent la
innate
paix et la
desire for
sécurité,
peaceful
non pas
coexistence,
le terrorisme, et
peaceful
qui prônent
coexistence of Israeli and Palestinian
une
states as
coexistence
the only
pacifique
roadmap for secure
entre
and
Israël et la
prosperous
Palestine
long-term future.
comme étant la seule voie
Pour
vers
ces
un
raisons,
avenir
le
prospère.
Canada a l'intention de reconnaître
This is
l'État
why
de la
Canada
Palestine
intends to
lors de
recognize the state of
la
Palestine at the
80e
80th
session de
General Assembly of
l'Assemblée
the United
générale des
Nations,
Nations Unies en septembre
which will take place in
2025.
September 2025.
Cette intention repose sur
We
la volonté,
intend to
la
do so
volonté de l'autorité palestinienne
because the
de mener
Palestinian
des
Authority
réformes essentielles,
has committed to
notamment
lead
la
much
promesse
needed
de son
reform.
président Mahmoud Abbas d'organiser des élections
The Palestinian
générales
Authority's president,
en
Mahmoud Abbas,
2026
has
et
committed
de ne
to
pas
holding general
militariser
elections in
l'État
2026.
palestinien.
He has also committed to not
Le Canada va
militarizing the
redoubler
state of Palestine.
d'efforts pour appuyer une
Canada
gouvernance
will
forte
continue to work
en
hard to
Palestine
support
et
strong
contribuer à
governance
un
in
avenir
Palestine.
pacifique et
Canada
promoteur
will
pour son peuple.
contribute to a peaceful and
Je me
promising
suis
future for the people of
entretenu
Palestine.
avec le président Abbas pour
I met
réaffirmer
with President Abbas
ces points.
to restate these commitments.
For the reasons I cited earlier, Canada intends to
Pour les raisons
recognize
que
the
j'ai
state of
données tout à
Palestine
l'heure, le
at
Canada a
the 80th
l'intention de
session
reconnaître
of the
l'État
United
palestine
Nations
à la
General
80e
Assembly in
session
September
de l'Assemblée générale des
2025.
Nations Unies en septembre
This
2025.
intention is predicated on the
Cette
Palestinian
intention
Authority's
repose
commitment to
sur la
much needed
volonté de
reform,
l'État,
including
la
commitments
volonté
by
de
the
la
Palestinian
Palestine de
Authority's
mener des
President
réformes importantes,
Abbas to fundamentally reform
y
its government,
compris
to
de
hold general
réformer la
elections in
gouvernance, de
2026,
tenir
in
des
which
élections
Hamas can play
générales en
no part,
2026, là où
and
le
to
Hamas ne peut jouer aucun
demilitarize the
rôle, et
Palestinian
de
state.
démilitariser l'État palestinien.
Canada will increase its efforts in supporting strong
Le
democratic
Canada
governance
va
in
soutenir
Palestine
une
and the
gouvernance forte
contributions
et
of its people
démocratique en
to a more
Palestine
peaceful
et
and
la
hopeful
contribution de
future.
la population à
I
un
spoke today
avenir
with President Abbas at length to reaffirm
plus
his
pacifique.
commitment.
J'ai parlé au président Hamas
Canada
pour
reiterates
réaffirmer
that Hamas must
notre
immediately
volonté.
release all hostages taken
Le
in the
Hamas
horrific
doit libérer
terrorist
tous les
attack of
otages
October
qui ont
7th,
été pris dans
that Hamas must
l'attaque
disarm,
haineuse du 7
and that
octobre. Le Hamas doit
must
se
play
désarmer
no role
et le
in the
Hamas
future
ne doit
governance
jouer
of
aucun
Palestine.
rôle dans la gouvernance future de la Palestine.
Canada will always steadfastly support
Le
Israel's
Canada va
existence as an
toujours
independent state in the
soutenir
Middle East, living in
l'existence
peace
d'Israël
and security.
au Proche-Orient dans
Any
un
path
environnement de
to
paix
lasting peace for
et
Israel
de stabilité.
also requires a viable and stable Palestinian state,
Cela requiert
and
un
one
État
that
palestinien
recognizes
viable
Israel's inalienable right to security.
et la reconnaissance du droit inaliénable d'Israël à la paix et à la
Le Canada
sécurité.
a déjà engagé plus de
Canada has already
340
committed
millions
over
de dollars
$340
pour
million
remédier à
in
la
order
situation humanitaire
to address
désastreuse
the
à
disastrous
Gaza.
humanitarian situation in
De plus,
Gaza.
Nous nous sommes engagés à accorder un
Moreover,
nouveau financement de 30
we have
millions de dollars
also
pour
pledged
aider
to
à répondre
offer
aux besoins
an
des
additional
civils
$30 million
palestiniens.
in order to meet the
Nous
needs
fournissons
of Palestinians.
aussi 10 millions de dollars de plus
We are
pour
also
soutenir
pledging
l'autorité
an additional
palestinienne
$10 million to
dans
support the
ses efforts de
Palestinian Authority
stabilisation et de gouvernance
to
de la
support them
Cisjordanie.
in stabilizing the
Nous
West Bank
travaillons
and
avec
in
nos
governance
alliés
of the West
pour
Bank.
fournir une aide immédiate
We are
aux
working with our
personnes
allies
qui ont
to deliver immediate aid to those who
désespérément
so desperately
besoin.
need it.
Nous collaborons directement
We are
avec des
working
partenaires comme
directly
la
with
Jordanie
partners
afin
such as Jordan
d'acheminer
in
l'aide aux
order to
populations
deliver
dans les jours
assistance
à venir.
to those who need it
Et nous
in the
allons
upcoming days.
intensifier les efforts que nous déployons
We will
avec nos
intensify
partenaires
our efforts
internationaux afin d'élaborer
alongside our international
plan de paix
partners in
crédible.
order to develop a
Ce
credible
plan
peace plan.
établira des mécanismes
This
de
plan
gouvernance et de
will
sécurité
establish
pour la Palestine
governance and security
et
mechanisms for
garantira
Palestine.
l'acheminement
The plan
de l'aide
will
humanitaire
ensure
nécessaire à
that
Gaza.
humanitarian aid is delivered to Gaza
Canada
as
will be a
needed.
constructive partner in building a just, meaningful, and
Le
lasting
Canada
peace in the
sera un
region,
partenaire
and a
constructif
future that respects
pour
the dignity,
un
security, and the
avenir
aspirations of all
juste
Palestinians and Israelis.
et pacifique dans le Proche-Orient.
We say the devastation in the Middle East is deeply personal
La
to many
catastrophe
Canadians.
au Proche-Orient touche
Palestinian
personnellement
Canadians are
bien les
watching as
Canadiens.
communities
Les
across
Canadiens
Gaza
d'origine
face
palestinienne
destruction and deprivation.
voient les
As
privations,
communities
la
in the West
destruction à
Bank
Gaza
are annexed.
alors que des
The
communautés en
heinous attacks of
Cisjordanie
October
sont
7th
annexées. Les
traumatized the
attaques
Jewish people in
haineuses
Israel and here in
du
Canada.
7 octobre ont traumatisé les populations juives au Canada
With
et
each day
partout
that
dans
the
le monde.
remaining hostages, the remains are not returned, families live in fear.
Les familles vivent dans la peur
The
et dans
rising
la souffrance
anti-Semitism and
avec
the
chaque jour
words,
qui passe
actions,
sans
and
nouvelles
violence,
de leurs proches.
including against Jewish communities
On
right
observe
here in
également
Canada, is
des actes de
abhorrent.
violence contre les populations
And it's
juives
why
ici
we're
même au
introducing
Canada.
legislation this
C'est
fall
abominable
that will make it
et
a
c'est pour
criminal
ça que
offense
nous allons
to
présenter un projet de
intentionally
loi cet
and
automne
willfully
pour que
obstruct
ce
access
soit une
to a
infraction
place of worship,
d'interdire l'accès à
schools,
des lieux de
and
culte,
community
à des
centers.
écoles et des centres communautaires.
We will also invest in the physical protection
Nous
of
allons
vulnerable
également
communities
investir dans la protection
places
physique de communautés vulnérables et des lieux de culte.
Basic security is an inalienable
La
right of
sécurité
every
est
human
un
being.
droit
defend
inaliénable
that
de
right
tous
for
les
every
êtres humains.
Canadian.
Et nous allons défendre ce
The
droit
two-state
pour tous nos
solution
concitoyens.
Canada supports is built on the promise of
La
Israelis
solution à
and
deux
Palestinians
États
living side by side in
repose
peace and
sur
security.
l'idée qu'Israël et la
thank you for
Palestine
your
peuvent
attention, Anita,
vivre
And the
côte à
minister and I
côte
would be happy
dans la paix et
now
la
to take your
sécurité.
questions.
Je vous remercie et je suis disposé à répondre à vos
Merci.
questions.
Thank you, Prime Minister.
Merci, Monsieur
I'm
le Premier
told that
ministre.
we will have about 15 minutes of questions.
On
Donc,
me
on
dit
va
qu'il y aura
commencer
15
comme
minutes
le veut
de
la
questions.
tradition par les journalistes dans la salle.
As usual, we
Et
will start
ensuite, on va
with
passer aux
questions
journalistes
from
sur
journalists in the
Zoom. Si
room.
vous êtes
Then we
à
will
distance
take
sur la
questions
plateforme
from
Zoom,
journalists
je
on
vous
Zoom.
inviterai
If you are
à utiliser la
participating
fonction
online
lever la
via
main
Zoom,
pour
please use
être
the raise hand
reconnu
function
ensuite.
so that we can
On
call
va
you.
rester sur le principe une question et une
There
question de
will be
suivi.
one
S'il
question
vous
and one
plaît,
follow-up question per
gardez vos
journalist.
questions les plus concises possibles pour
Please
en,
be as concise
évidemment
as
passer le
possible
plus de journalistes possible.
so
Just a
that
quick
as many
note
journalists can ask
to be
questions as
mindful
possible.
for interpreter friends, if you have an earpiece, just
Pour
keep
les
it away
interprètes,
from the
si vous
microphone
avez
at all
une
time.
oreillette, veuillez tenir cette oreillette
We'll
loin du
start from
microphone
with
en tout
Paul
temps.
Wells.
Nous allons commencer par Paul Wells.
Thanks, Boris. Good
Merci,
afternoon,
Boris.
Prime Minister. You
Bonjour,
say
Monsieur le
that the
Premier ministre.
recognition of a
Vous
Palestinian
dites que la
state is
reconnaissance de
predicated
l'État
on
de
important
Palestine
democratic reforms.
repose
Is it
sur des
conditional
réformes
on quick
démocratiques
action
importantes.
towards those reforms? Is there any scenario in which you
Y
arrive
a-t-il
at
un
the General
scénario
Assembly
où
and
vous
don't
arrivez
recognize
à
Palestine?
la session
Can
générale des
I
Nations
thank
Unies
for
que
the
vous ne
question, Mr. Wells.
reconnaissez pas l'État de
Let
Palestine?
me say on the second part, it's an
Merci,
intention,
Monsieur
so
Wells.
of course, there's a
C'est notre
scenario,
intention.
possibly one that I can't imagine, so
Il y
I
a un
wouldn't want to.
scénario que
If there were no scenario, we
je ne
would
pourrais pas
proceed
imaginer.
immediately.
S'il n'y avait pas de scénario
That's
imaginable,
the
on
point.
procéderait
But
de la
to go
sorte
more broadly and,
immédiatement. Mais
maybe
pour
this is
répondre à
important,
votre question plus
area
globalement,
you're concentrating on, it's predicated, it relies upon the representations that have been made by the Palestinian
nous avons
Authority,
fait valoir des arguments
representations
auprès
that
de
have been made
l'autorité
now,
palestinienne,
several times,
des
both
arguments qui ont
publicly
été
spoken
présentés
in
plusieurs
writing,
fois,
to me
tant
as
à l'oral
Prime Minister,
et par écrit,
and representations that I tested, if you will, President
Ce sont
Abbas in a lengthy and robust
des
call
arguments que
today,
j'ai
to
rappelés
confirm,
au président
the
Hamas
intentions,
aujourd'hui avec
and,
le président
and the
Hamas au
ability to do
téléphone.
so. Now, part of what Minister Anand and her colleagues
La
are
ministre
doing
Anand et
is to
ses
provide
collègues
some resources to help with some
fournissent
governance
des
aspects
ressources
of those.
pour
But of course, the
contribuer
most important element
aux
of
réformes de
those
gouvernance.
representations, with respect to the democratic process.
C'est l'un des aspects les plus
Who
importants
cannot
de
be
ces
part of
réformes.
that process? Hamas.
Le
Who can
Hamas
play
ne
no
peut
role
pas
in the
faire
future state?
partie
Hamas. The
de l'État
demilitarization
palestinien à
and
venir.
the persistent
Il faut que l'État palestinien
demilitarized
soit,
Palestinian state,
que
and
le
of
Hamas
course, the
soit
reinforcement
démilitarisé, que
of the
la
importance of
Palestine
living
le
side
soit
by side
aussi,
in peace and security,
pour que
with Israel.
Israël et
So
Palestine
it's a
puissent
relatively
vivre
short
côte
period.
à
Last
côte dans la paix et
observation,
la
if I may.
sécurité.
It's a relatively short period of time
C'est
between
une
now and
courte
the UN General
période
Assembly.
de temps, donc
But we'll be
d'ici
working with the
à
Palestinian
l'Assemblée
Authority,
générale des Nations unies,
and very
nous
importantly,
allons
not just us,
collaborer avec l'autorité
but a series
palestinienne,
of our
pas
allies
juste
and
nous, mais nos
regional
alliés
powers,
aussi et des pouvoirs
including
régionaux,
those that the minister was with in
y
New York
compris
earlier
que la
this week,
ministre
and
a rencontré à
can't
New
name them
York
all, but
cette
of
semaine.
course,
Je ne pourrais pas
Saudi
tous les
Arabia,
nommer,
Qatar,
mais l'Arabie saoudite,
Egypt, and
le
others,
Qatar, l'Égypte
who
et d'autres
also, to broaden your question,
qui, eux
bit,
aussi
have been very clear now that Hamas can play no role, that Hamas must
affirment
return
que
all
le
the
Hamas ne
hostages
peut
and
jouer
remain,
aucun rôle et doivent rendre
and the Palestinian state must be
tous les
Follow
prisonniers.
up. Yesterday, you had announced no intention
Une
to
question
recognize
complémentaire.
Palestine.
Hier,
Today, you
vous
have
n'aviez
announced
pas
that intention. It's
d'intention
impossible for
de
me
reconnaître
not
l'État
to
de
read into
Palestine.
that a
Aujourd'hui,
critique
vous
of
en avez
Israel's recent
l'intention.
behavior in the region.
Est-ce
Well, it's
est-ce que vous critiquez le comportement
there
d'Israël
are
dans la
elements,
région?
and I listed them in my remarks, and they played a
J'en
central
ai
factor
parlé
in
dans
our
mes
decision.
remarques
I think
et
One of
Ce
the
qu'on a
one
vu
of the core
dernièrement
points
a joué un rôle dans
is
ma
that
décision.
Canada's had a
L'un des
long-standing
aspects clés,
principled stand, as
c'est
you
que
know.
le
I won't
Canada,
repeat it. You're
depuis
familiar
très
with it.
longtemps,
A
a
belief in a two-state
une
solution,
position très
inalienable
fondée
rights
sur des principes,
of both people,
une solution à
and the
deux
fact
États,
that
les
peace and
droits
security can only
inaliénables des
be
deux
achieved through it.
populations et la paix et la sécurité.
That possibility of a two-state solution is being eroded before our eyes.
Ces
The
perspectives
accelerated
s'étiolent
settlements,
sous nos yeux.
the potential
On
partition
pense à la
of the West
colonisation
Bank,
de la Cisjordanie. On
the
pense aussi
actions
à
in
la
Gaza that
séparation de
shift
la
large portions
Cisjordanie.
of the population, 80% of the population displaced. Other
Il y a
actions which are
80% de
changing
la
the
population qui est
facts on the
déplacée.
ground in a way that removes
Les
the
choses
possibility or
changent
lessens the
sur le
possibility
terrain, ce
of
qui
there being a
réduit la
Palestinian state.
possibilité d'un
And
État
then when that is
palestinien.
reinforced by votes to that effect, by statements and policies
On entend
to
des
that effect of the
déclarations,
government,
des
yes,
politiques,
that has
des
been
votes.
one of the factors
Oui,
that is,
c'est un
has brought
facteur
us to this point to try to
qui nous a
reverse
amenés
with partners. We're
au
not
point
under
où on
illusions
en est
about the strength
aujourd'hui.
of Canada, but to reverse with partners
On
this cycle
cherche
so that
à
a two-state
inverser
solution
le
becomes
cycle
viable.
qui est en cours
Lots
pour
more
que la
has to happen.
solution à deux États soit possible. Il reste
We'll
encore
go
beaucoup
to
de choses à
Stephanie
faire
Levitt,
d'ici.
Lobena.
Hello, Prime Minister. Just to pick up on what you said there then, how do you see this recognition as a way to achieve that peace? Why is this a useful thing to do?
It's useful in several respects in our judgment. The first is that it works with a series of partners in the region, traditional allies, but other countries that we have worked less with. Those more broadly represented in the two-state solution process that was more formally launched earlier this week. Secondly, it reaffirms and it broadens. We're part of a process that broadens the recognition of certain aspects that we have always viewed as fundamental for a Palestinian state, but others have not acknowledged. No role for Hamas, demilitarized, and the horrible specifics of the current situation, the return of all the hostages that never made. Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Egypt is three examples of countries that now, literally in the last few days, have made those determinations public. And the third aspect, and I'll hand back, is that we are part of a process. We came to this decision independently, but we are part of processes that are working towards peace, that have strength in breadth and in number. So the two-state solution process, you would have heard reference to the E3 process, Germany, France, and the United Kingdom, and peace plan that they are working on, that they briefed the U.S. president on. And in both those respects, Canada can help to support those efforts.
It's not been clear, say, in the last 48 hours that either the Netanyahu government or Hamas is at all interested in these conditions. And so who's going to make them?
Well, I think there's a couple of things. I mean, Hamas, I don't know, Hamas is not welcome in any way, shape, or form. So of course, and one of the issues is not to give Hamas in any way, shape, or form a veto over a process that affects both the Israeli and Palestinian people. I could say much harsher things, and I should say much harsher things about Hamas, but that's a basic structural point. There are some in positions of influence in the state of Israel that do not want a two-state solution, that are taking actions to frustrate that actively. And we are part of a growing and very significant international community that is leaning against them, that is prioritizing the possibility and the prospect for a two-state solution. There are other measures that can be taken. For now, what we're doing is to promote a positive process towards peace.
Olivier Ferrand-Boissé, TVA.
Olivier Ferrand-Boissé.
Oui, bonjour. Bonjour à vous deux.
TVA.
Pouvez-vous nous expliquer en
Hello,
quoi
hello to both of
de
you.
dire aujourd'hui que
Please
vous allez
explain
éventuellement
something.
reconnaître la
Today, you're
Palestine
saying
va
that
venir
you
changer quoi que ce
may
soit dans la
recognize
situation
Palestinian
humanitaire
statehood?
actuelle qui semble
What
être le
would
motif
that
principal derrière
change
votre
in the
déclaration?
current humanitarian
ça
situation, which
c'est une
in fact seems to be
question
the main
fondamentale. Merci
reason for your
pour
declaration,
cette
your
question.
statement
Alors,
today? Answer.
qu'est-ce
Thank you
qu'on
for
peut
that
faire?
very
Qu'est-ce que le
important
Canada peut
question.
faire pour la situation
What can
humanitaire
Canada do
actuelle
to
maintenant?
support the
C'est pas une question
ongoing
de diplomatie,
humanitarian
c'est une
crisis?
question de l'aide
It's not
humanitaire.
a matter of
Il
diplomacy,
faut
it's a matter
travailler
of
avec
humanitarian
nos
assistance.
partenaires, nos
We
interlocuteurs
must
dans la
work
région,
with our
par
partners in the
exemple
region.
la Jordanie
Our
et
partners
le Canada
include Jordan,
maintenant.
for example.
Maintenant, à ce moment-ci,
Canada must
on travaille avec
now,
la
at
Jordanie
this very
afin
moment, in fact,
de
at this very moment,
provenir
we are working with
l'aide
Jordan
humanitaire
in
demain
order to
à Gaza.
deliver
Il
humanitarian
n'y a
aid
que
to Gaza
4 ou
tomorrow.
5 pays qui peuvent
There
le
are
faire
only 4
à
or
travers le monde.
5 countries which are
Alors,
in a position to do
ça
so.
c'est un processus, c'est bien sûr la
This is
situation
all part of the
humanitaire
process.
est reliée
The
à
humanitarian
la
situation
grande diplomatie,
is,
mais
of
c'est une
course,
question pour
related
le moment
to
actuel
broader
à
diplomacy,
Gaza.
but we must focus on the
C'est
current situation in Gaza,
surtout c'est une question de l'aide humanitaire.
which is a
Et
matter
pour le
of
moment,
humanitarian aid.
pour le
That's
moment,
what's required.
l'État israélien ouvre un peu la
The
possibilité
state of
de fournir
Israel
de l'aide humanitaire.
is currently
J'aimerais vous relancer sur les négociations
opening the doors
commerciales
to more
avec les
humanitarian aid.
États-Unis.
Follow-up
Le temps
question. I'd
presse.
like to ask you about trade talks with
Ouais,
the
On a
United
vu des
States.
accords signés
The clock is
avec l'Union
ticking.
européenne. Est-ce qu'à ce point-ci,
The United States
vous seriez
signed a
prêt
deal
à
with the
accepter un
European
accord dans
Union.
lequel on aurait
Would you, at
un
this
tarif
point, accept a
réduit de
deal
base
under
qui
which
inclurait
we
aussi
would have
des achats ou
a
des investissements aux États-Unis, comme on a vu avec l'Union
base
européenne?
tariff,
OK, c'est une
a lower
question
tariff baseline,
spécifique
as with
en ce qui
the
concerne
case
les
of the
négociations.
European Union?
Ils sont des négociations.
Answer, that's a very specific
Les
question
négociations
about the ongoing negotiations.
ils sont constructifs, ils sont
Our
complexes,
talks
ils continuent.
thus far have been
Il
constructive,
y a une
and they're
possibilité
ongoing.
que
They cover a
la
broad
terminer,
variety of topics.
que les négociations ne finissent pas
Now,
le 1er août.
it
Ça,
is
c'est possible.
possible
that
that we
en ce
may
qui
not
concerne, mais il y a
conclude
plusieurs,
talks by August 1st,
opportunités
but
pour la collaboration
there are
entre
many
le Canada et les
avenues
États-Unis.
for
Ça, c'est
teamwork and
ça, c'est
cooperation
clair.
between Canada and the
Y
United
compris
States.
les
Of course,
investissements, les dépenses
this
canadiennes pour
includes
la défense et
investments.
la sécurité.
This also
Mais
includes
c'est
Canadian
au milieu des
investments in
négociations.
defense and security.
Merci.
Talks are ongoing.
So
Thank you.
the question is, well, I'll simplify
Je vais résumer
to say that, look, these are complex, they're comprehensive, they're constructive negotiations with the Americans are ongoing. It's possible that they may not conclude by the 1st of August. But we'll see. The team's there. We're working hard. Conversations today, myself. So we'll see. There are, and the specific aspect of the question included a reference to the European Union deal, and could it include, could our accord with the United States include commitments on investments and other aspects? And I just observed that there are many areas for cooperation between Canada and the United States, including defense spending, security spending, investment, which is one of the reasons why we're having.
Next up, Paul Dutch, Global News. Speaking of the United States, did you consult with the U.S. about your decision to recognize Palestine, and can the sustainable peace process work without U.S. being on side?
Look, the United States is the essential partner in peace in the Middle East, and in virtually in many parts of the world. And we've seen that demonstrated. First point. Second point is that the president does take a direct interest in resolving conflicts, and as has with respect to a broader set of developments in the Middle East. And so again, the United States, this president will play and continue to play a central role. Others have responsibilities Canada included, responsibilities on the humanitarian side, responsibilities with governance and other aspects that we're supporting. And we make our own independent foreign policy positions. And when we see opportunities, when we see necessity, which is what we see in this case, given the retreat of the prospect of a two-state solution because of the facts on the ground, as I explained, when we see that possibility and we see the combination of an ability to influence because of our own voice and actions, but because of others and other processes that are being put in place. But to be absolutely clear, and I'll finish on this point, which is, I referenced earlier an E3 plan, that the early stages peace plan. I talked to Prime Minister Starmer about it, President Macron as well today. Prime Minister Starmer, this is public domain, briefed the President of the United States about the plan. So there are connections all the way through, and my colleague obviously in regular contact with,
You said you came to this decision independently, so you're saying you would have come to this without France or the UK making this decision?
No, I mean, independent of the United States, but yes, it does matter that others are moving. It does matter because it increases the prospect of success. But the core of the decision is taken on the principle that of self-determination and the rights of people to self-determination. We have long, Canada, speaking for Canada now, have long felt that this should come later in a process, and that our recognitions, other recognitions, the state of Palestine, should come at a point of maximum impact during the peace process. We're now in a position, I'm sorry to repeat myself, where in our judgment and the judgment of others, is that the prospect of a Palestinian state is literally receding before our eyes, and being eroded before our eyes. And so the act of the intention to recognize what we're saying today, and working with others to support a Palestinian state, possibility of Palestinian state reestablishes that.
David Turton, CBC.
U.S. trade talks. Is there any evidence that a deal with the U.S. is possible without tariffs on aluminum and steel?
Look, I think I'd answer it this way, which is that the president has been very clear, and all the actions bear this out, and that there are certain sectors that are strategic in their judgment to the United States economy: aluminum, steel, automobiles, pharmaceuticals, semiconductors, lumber. Falls under 232 as well, the so-called 232 authority, and potentially one or two more. The U.S. approach, the revealed approach of the United States in all those sectors, has been to have tariffs on base level, and that's consistent. That's consistent across with very few relatively minor exceptions. So if we're speaking in general terms, those are the priors. That's the case. Obviously, in any broader deal, there are gives and takes, and there's various factors. But I think we have to recognize that in the strategic sector, again, as defined by the United States, what's strategic to them, that they have tariffs.
Okay. And just coming back to the recognition of a Palestinian state and the conditions that, well, the assurances, excuse me, that you've been given by the Palestinian Authority, elections, reforms, non-militarization. Just coming back to that issue of elections, how do you expect them to hold elections in Gaza when you see the devastation, and when you see the occupation by the Israelis in the West Bank? How can they hold elections?
There are clearly that's not a possibility now. It's not a possibility in the near term. And part of this again is, let's go back to where we're starting, which is we are working ourselves with others
travaillons
to
avec
preserve
d'autres
the
pays
possibility of a two-state
pour
solution.
préserver cette possibilité
To
d'avoir
not
une solution à deux
allow
États.
the facts on the ground, deaths on the ground,
On ne peut pas
the settlements on the ground, the
permettre
appropriations on the
que
ground
les colonisations, que les
to
appropriations,
get to such an extent that,
que la
that
catastrophe
this is
soit
that this
telle
is not possible.
que ce ne
Much
soit pas
has to
possible.
happen in order for a democratic, viable state
Il y a beaucoup de choses qui
is
doivent se
established
produire
in
pour
Palestine. Fully
établir
recognize
un État palestinien
and
démocratique et
we're
viable.
committed to help work as part of that
Nous
process.
tenons
But
à
I
contribuer
wouldn't,
à
I'm
cet
not in
effort.
any way, shape, minimizing the scale of that task.
Je
But we are going back to
comprends
the fundamental principle
l'ampleur
of
de ce
self-determination,
projet.
what we can do to preserve that.
C'est un défi de taille, mais nous souhaitons y travailler de
On
concert
m'indique
avec
que
nos alliés.
malheureusement, c'est tout le temps qu'on a pour les questions, même
Unfortunately,
s'il
that's
reste
all the
plusieurs
time
journalistes sur la
remaining
liste
for
ainsi qu'en
questions.
ligne, malgré tout. Thank
Although
you very
there
much, Prime
are many
Minister.
journalists who had other questions, but we thank you very much, Prime Minister.
National Press Center.
Merci beaucoup,
Ceci
Monsieur le
met
Premier ministre.
un terme à cette conférence de presse. Merci beaucoup et bonne journée.
That concludes today's press conference. Thank you and have a great day.
Bonjour et bienvenue au Théâtre national de la presse. Je suis Boris Proulx, vice-président de la Tribune de la presse et journaliste au devoir. Et bienvenue à cette conférence de presse. Au podium, Mark Carney, le Premier ministre du Canada, ainsi qu'Anita Anand, la ministre des Affaires étrangères du Canada. After a few remarks, we'll go to the question period,
Après
first
quelques remarques,
in the
nous
room
passerons
and
aux
then
questions
on
des
Zoom.
journalistes à la
On
fois
that, Prime
en
Minister, you
présentiel
have the
et
floor.
ensuite sur Zoom. Monsieur le Premier ministre, vous avez la parole.
Earlier today, I convened a cabinet meeting
Plus tôt
to
aujourd'hui,
do
j'ai
two things. One,
convoqué
provide an
mon
update on the
cabinet
state of negotiations
pour
with the
leur
United
faire un
States,
état des lieux
and
des
secondly, to
négociations avec
discuss the
les
situation
États-Unis et
in the
pour
Middle East.
discuter de la situation au
With respect
Proche-Orient.
to the first, the trade
Au
negotiations
sujet
with the
de
US,
la première question,
as
les
you know, we're
négociations
seeking the
commerciales
best
avec
deal
les
for
États-Unis.
Canadians.
Nous
We have
sommes à
not
la
yet
recherche
reached
du
that
meilleur
deal.
accord avec les
Negotiations
États-Unis.
will
On n'y est pas
continue,
encore. Les
but we do.
négociations vont se
Mr.
poursuivre
LeBlanc
jusqu'à ce
and
qu'on y
senior
arrive.
officials
Le
will
ministre
remain in
Leblanc
Washington
et des hauts fonctionnaires
in
seront
pursuit
à
of that.
Washington pour
The focus
arriver à
of
cette
our
fin.
meeting was really the Middle East.
L'objectif de la réunion
The level
d'aujourd'hui,
of
c'est le
human
Proche-Orient.
suffering in Gaza
La
is
souffrance
intolerable
humaine à
and
Gaza
it's
est
rapidly
intolérable
deteriorating.
et la situation se détériore
Des dizaines
rapidement.
de milliers de Palestiniens ont été
Tens of
tués.
thousands of Palestinians
Des
have been
milliers
killed.
d'autres sont au bord
Thousands
de
more
la
are
famine.
on the brink of famine.
Le Canada condamne le fait que le
Canada
gouvernement
condemns the
israélien a
fact that the
laissé le
Israeli
catastrophe
government
se
has let the
détériorer.
situation
à Gaza.
deteriorate in Gaza to this
En tant que
extent.
membre fondateur des Nations
We
Unies
are a
et de
founding
l'OTAN,
member of
le
both the
Canada est
United Nations
parmi les
and of
premiers à
NATO.
défendre la paix
As such,
et
Canada
de
is
la
always among the
sécurité
first to stand
dans le
to
monde.
defend peace and security
Nous avons le
around the
devoir
world.
de faire
It is
respecter les
our
droits
duty
de la
to
personne
ensure that human
à
rights are
l'international
upheld abroad.
et de favoriser la paix et la
We also
sécurité
have a
au
duty to
pays
promote peace and safety
et
in
à l'étranger.
Canada and around the world.
Earlier this week, the Minister of Foreign Affairs representing Canada
Cette semaine, la
at the
ministre des
UN
Affaires
high-level conference
étrangères
on
a
a two-state
représenté le Canada
solution in
à
Europe.
une réunion de haut niveau des Nations
Recent
Unies
days,
sur
I've
la
spoken with
solution à
our
deux
allies,
États.
including President
Récemment, j'ai
Macron,
parlé avec
Prime
nos
Minister
alliés,
Starmer,
le Premier
President
ministre
von der Leyen.
Macron, le Premier ministre
Also had a
Starmer,
number of discussions with our
la
ambassador
Première
to the United
ministre von der
Nations. Bob Rae.
Leyen, ainsi qu'un grand nombre de nos partenaires.
International cooperation is
La
essential to
coopération
securing
internationale est essentielle
lasting peace
pour
and
qu'on arrive
stability
à
in the
une
Middle
paix
East. And Canada
durable au Proche-Orient.
will do its best to help
Le
lead
Canada
that
va
effort.
faire de son mieux pour qu'on y arrive.
Canada has long been committed
Le Canada
to a
tient depuis
two-state
longtemps à
solution.
une solution à deux États.
An independent, viable, and sovereign Palestinian state
Un État
living
palestinien
side
indépendant
by
et
side
souverain qui
with the
est
state of
vit
Israel
aux
in
côtés
peace and
d'Israël
security.
dans la paix et la sécurité.
For decades, it was
Pendant
hoped
des
that this
décennies,
outcome would be
on
achieved as
espérait
part of a peace process
que
built
le
around a
processus de
negotiated
paix
settlement
permettrait d'arriver
between
à
the
cette
Israeli
fin
government and the
avec un
Palestinian
accord
Authority.
négocié entre l'État israélien et
Regrettably,
l'autorité palestinienne.
this approach
Malheureusement,
is no longer tenable.
cette approche n'est plus tenable.
Prospects for a two-state solution
Les
have been steadily
perspectives
and gravely
d'une
eroded,
solution à deux États
including by
se sont
the
étiolées
pervasive threat of Hamas terrorism
à
to
cause
Israel
de la
and its
menace
people,
du Hamas contre
culminating in
Israël
the
et sa
heinous
population,
attack
y
of October
compris
7th,
les attaques haineuses
2023.
du 7
2023.
octobre
The
2023.
terrorist organization Hamas's long-standing violent
L'organisation
rejection of
terroriste,
Israel's
le
right to
Hamas,
exist
a longtemps violé
and
le
its
droit
rejection of a two-state
d'Israël
solution.
d'exister et a rejeté la solution à deux États.
The accelerated settlement building across the West Bank and East Jerusalem,
Les colonisations en
all
Cisjordanie
the
et
while
dans
the separate
Jérusalem
violence against
Est
Palestinians has soared, has also
et
undermined
la
the process.
violence contre les
As have
Palestiniens ont
actions
également
such as the
miné
E1
le
settlement
processus
plan
de paix.
and this month's vote
C'est sans
by the
parler
Knesset
du
calling for the
plan
annexation
E1
of the
et
West Bank.
le vote de la Knesset
And the ongoing
d'annexer
failure of the Israeli government to prevent the rapidly
d'annexer la
deteriorating
Palestine.
humanitarian disaster in Gaza,
La
with
catastrophe
impeded access
humanitaire
to
se
food and other
détériore
essential
à
humanitarian
Gaza.
supplies.
La population n'a
The
pas
deepening
l'accès
suffering of
nécessaire
civilians leaves
aux
no room
denrées
for delay in
alimentaires.
coordinated international action
D'où
to support peace,
l'importance
security, and the
d'une
dignity
action
of human life.
concertée pour protéger la dignité
Preserving a
humaine.
two-state solution means standing with
Une
all
solution
people
à
who
deux États,
choose peace over violence
c'est
or
de
terrorism.
parler
It means
aux
honoring
côtés de ceux qui
their
défendent la
innate
paix et la
desire for
sécurité,
peaceful
non pas
coexistence,
le terrorisme, et
peaceful
qui prônent
coexistence of Israeli and Palestinian
une
states as
coexistence
the only
pacifique
roadmap for secure
entre
and
Israël et la
prosperous
Palestine
long-term future.
comme étant la seule voie
Pour ces
d'un avenir
raisons, le
prospère.
Canada a l'intention de reconnaître
This is
l'État
why
de la
Canada
Palestine
intends to
lors de
recognize the state
la
of Palestine at the
80e
80th
session de
General Assembly of
l'Assemblée
the United
générale des
Nations,
Nations Unies en septembre
which will take place in September
2025.
2025.
Cette intention repose sur
We
la volonté,
intend to
la
do
volonté de l'autorité palestinienne
because the
de mener
Palestinian
des réformes
Authority
essentielles,
has committed to
notamment
lead
la
much
promesse
needed
de son
reform.
président Mahmoud Abbas d'organiser des élections
The Palestinian
générales
Authority's president,
en
Mahmoud Abbas,
2026
has
et
committed
de ne
to
pas
holding general
militariser
elections in
l'État
2026.
palestinien.
He has also committed to not
Le Canada va
militarizing the
redoubler
state of Palestine.
d'efforts pour appuyer une
Canada
gouvernance
will
forte
continue to work
en
hard to
Palestine
support
et
strong
contribuer à
governance
un
in
avenir
Palestine.
pacifique et
Canada
promoteur
will
pour son peuple.
contribute to a peaceful and
Je me
promising
suis
future for the people of
entretenu
Palestine.
avec le président Abbas pour
I met
réaffirmer
with President Abbas
ces points.
to restate these commitments.
For the reasons I cited earlier, Canada intends to
Pour les raisons
recognize the
que j'ai
state of
données tout à
Palestine
l'heure, le
at
Canada a
the 80th
l'intention de
session
reconnaître
of the
l'État de
United
Palestine
Nations
à la
General
80e
Assembly in
session
September
de l'Assemblée générale des
2025.
Nations Unies en septembre
This
2025.
intention is predicated on the
Cette
Palestinian
intention
Authority's
repose
commitment to
sur la
much needed
volonté de
reform,
l'État,
including
la
commitments
volonté
by
de
the
la
Palestinian
Palestine de
Authority's
mener des
President
réformes importantes,
Abbas to fundamentally reform
y
its government,
compris
to
de
hold general
réformer la
elections in
gouvernance, de
2026
tenir
in
des
which
élections
Hamas can play
générales en
no part,
2026, là où
and
le
to
Hamas ne peut jouer aucun
demilitarize the
rôle, et
Palestinian
de
state.
démilitariser l'État palestinien.
Canada will increase its efforts in supporting strong
Le
democratic
Canada
governance
va
in
soutenir
Palestine
une
and the
gouvernance forte
contributions
et
of its people
démocratique en
to a more
Palestine
peaceful
et
and
la
hopeful
contribution de
future.
la population à
I
un
spoke today
avenir
with President Abbas at length to reaffirm
plus
his
pacifique.
commitment.
J'ai parlé au président Hamas
Canada
pour
reiterates
réaffirmer
that Hamas must
notre
immediately
volonté.
release all hostages taken
Le
in the
Hamas
horrific
doit libérer
terrorist
tous les
attack of
otages
October
qui ont
7th,
été pris dans
that Hamas must
l'attaque
disarm,
haineuse du 7
and that
octobre. Le
Hamas
Hamas doit
must
se
play
désarmer
no role
et le
in the
Hamas
future
ne doit
governance
jouer
of
aucun
Palestine.
rôle dans la gouvernance future de la Palestine.
Canada will always steadfastly support
Le
Israel's
Canada va
existence as an
toujours
independent state in the
soutenir
Middle East, living in
l'existence
peace
d'Israël
and security.
au Proche-Orient dans
Any
un
path
environnement de
to
paix
lasting peace for
et de
Israel
stabilité.
also requires a viable and stable Palestinian state,
Cela requiert
and
un
one
État
that
palestinien
recognizes
viable
Israel's inalienable right to
et,
security.
et la reconnaissance du droit inaliénable d'Israël à la paix et à la
Le Canada
sécurité.
a déjà engagé plus de
Canada has already
340
committed over
millions de dollars
$340
pour
million
remédier à
in
la
order
situation humanitaire
to address
désastreuse
the
à
disastrous
Gaza.
humanitarian situation in
Depuis,
Gaza.
nous nous sommes engagés à accorder un
Moreover,
nouveau financement de 30
we have
millions de dollars
also
pour
pledged
aider
to
à répondre aux
offer
besoins
an
des
additional
civils
$30 million
palestiniens.
in order to meet the
Nous
needs
fournissons
of Palestinians.
aussi 10 millions de dollars de plus
We are
pour
also
soutenir
pledging
l'autorité
an additional
palestinienne
$10 million to
dans
support the
ses efforts de
Palestinian Authority
stabilisation et de gouvernance
to
de la
support them
Cisjordanie.
in stabilizing the
Nous
West Bank
travaillons
and
avec
in
nos
governance
alliés
of the West
pour
Bank.
fournir une aide immédiate
We are
aux
working with our
personnes
allies
qui ont
to deliver immediate aid to those who
désespérément
so desperately
besoin.
need it.
Nous collaborons directement
We are
avec les
working
partenaires
directly
comme la
with
Jordanie
partners
afin
such as Jordan
d'acheminer
in
l'aide
order
aux
to
populations
deliver
dans les jours
assistance
à venir.
to those who need it
Et nous
in the
allons
upcoming days.
intensifier les efforts que nous déployons
We will
avec nos
intensify
partenaires
our efforts
internationaux afin d'élaborer
alongside our international
plan de paix
partners in
crédible.
order to develop a
Ce
credible
plan
peace plan.
établira des mécanismes
This
de
plan
gouvernance et de
will
sécurité
establish
pour la Palestine
governance and security
et
mechanisms for
garantira
Palestine.
l'acheminement
The plan
de l'aide
will
humanitaire
ensure
nécessaire
that
à Gaza.
humanitarian aid is delivered to Gaza
Canada
as
will be a
needed.
constructive partner in building a just, meaningful, and
Le
lasting
Canada
peace in the
sera un
region,
partenaire
and a
constructif
future that respects
pour
the dignity,
un
security, and the
avenir
aspirations of all
juste
Palestinians and Israelis.
et pacifique dans le Proche-Orient.
We say the devastation in the Middle East is deeply personal
La
to many
catastrophe
Canadians.
au Proche-Orient touche
Palestinian
personnellement
Canadians are
bien des
watching as
Canadiens.
communities
Les
across
Canadiens
Gaza
d'origine
face
palestinienne
destruction and deprivation,
voient les
and as
privations,
communities
la
in the West
destruction à
Bank
Gaza,
are annexed.
alors que des
The
communautés en
heinous attacks of
Cisjordanie
October
sont
7th
annexées. Les
traumatized the
attaques
Jewish people in
haineuses
Israel and here in
du
Canada.
7 octobre ont
around
traumatisé
the
les
world.
populations juives au Canada
With
et
each day
partout
that
dans
the
le monde.
remaining hostages, the remains are not returned, families live in fear. and
Les
grief.
familles vivent dans la peur
The
et dans
rising
la souffrance
anti-Semitism and
avec
the
chaque jour
words,
qui passe
actions,
sans
and
nouvelles
violence,
de leurs proches.
including against Jewish communities
On
right
observe
here in
également
Canada, is
des actes de
abhorrent.
violence contre les
And
populations
it's
juives
why
ici
we're
même au
introducing
Canada.
legislation this
C'est
fall
abominable
that will make it
et
a
c'est pour
criminal
ça que
offense
nous allons
to
présenter un projet de loi
intentionally
cet
and
automne
willfully
pour que
obstruct
ce
access
soit une
to a
infraction
place of worship.
d'interdire l'accès à
schools,
des lieux de
and
culte,
community
à des
centers.
écoles et des centres communautaires.
We will also invest in the physical protection
Nous
of
allons
vulnerable
également
communities
investir dans la protection
places
physique de communautés vulnérables et des lieux de culte.
Basic security is an inalienable
La
right of
sécurité
every
est
human
un
being.
droit
defend
inaliénable
that
de
right
tous
for
les
every
êtres humains.
Canadian.
Et nous allons défendre ce
The
droit
two-state
pour tous nos
solution
concitoyens.
Canada supports is built on the promise of
La
Israelis
solution à
and
deux États
Palestinians living side by side in
repose
peace and
sur
security.
l'idée qu'Israël et la
thank you
Palestine
for your
peuvent
attention, Anand,
vivre
And the
côte à
minister and
côte
I would be happy
dans la paix et
now
la
to take your
sécurité.
questions.
Je vous remercie et je suis disposé à répondre à vos
Merci.
questions.
Thank you, Prime Minister.
Merci, Monsieur
I'm
le Premier
told that
ministre.
we will have about 15 minutes of questions.
On
Donc,
me
on
dit
va
qu'il y aura
commencer
15
comme
minutes
le veut
de
la tradition par les journalistes dans la salle.
As usual, we
Et
will start
ensuite, on va
with
passer aux
questions
journalistes
from
sur
journalists in the
Zoom. Si
room.
vous êtes
Then we
à
will
distance
take
sur la
questions
plateforme
from
Zoom, je
journalists
vous
on Zoom.
inviterai
If you are
à utiliser la
participating
fonction
online
lever la
via
main
Zoom,
pour
please use
être
the raise hand
reconnu
function
ensuite.
so that we can
On
call
va
on
rester
you.
sur le principe une question et une
There
question de
will be
suivi.
one
S'il
question
vous
and one
plaît,
follow-up question per
gardez vos
journalist.
questions les plus concises possibles pour
Please
en,
be as concise
évidemment
as
passer le
possible
plus de journalistes possible.
so
Just a
that
quick
as many
note
journalists can ask
to be
questions as
mindful
possible.
for interpreter friends, if you have an earpiece, just
Pour
keep
les
it away
interprètes,
from the
si vous
microphone
avez
at all
une
time.
oreillette, veuillez tenir cette
We'll
oreillette loin du
start from
microphone
with
en tout
Paul
temps.
Wells.
Nous allons commencer par Paul Wells.
Thanks, Boris. Good
Merci,
afternoon,
Boris.
Prime Minister. You
Bonjour,
say
Monsieur le
that the
Premier ministre.
recognition of a
Vous
Palestinian
dites que la
state is
reconnaissance de
predicated
l'État
on
de
important
Palestine
democratic reforms.
repose
Is it
sur des
conditional
réformes
on quick
démocratiques
action
importantes.
towards those reforms? Is there any scenario in which you
Y
arrive
a-t-il
at
un
the General
scénario
Assembly and
où vous
don't
arrivez
recognize
à
Palestine?
la session
Can
générale
I
des Nations
thank
Unies
for
que
the
vous ne
question, Mr. Wells.
reconnaissez pas l'État de
Let
Palestine?
me say on the second part, it's an
Merci,
intention.
Monsieur
So
Wells.
of course, there's a
C'est notre
scenario,
intention.
possibly one that I can't imagine.
Il
So
y a
I
un
wouldn't want
scénario
to.
que
If there were no scenario, we
je ne
would
pourrais pas
proceed
imaginer.
immediately.
S'il n'y avait pas de scénario
That's
imaginable,
first
on
point. But
procéderait
to
de la
go
sorte
more broadly and
immédiatement. Mais
maybe
pour
this is
répondre à
important
votre question plus
area
globalement,
you're concentrating on, it's predicated. It relies upon the representations that have been made by the Palestinian
nous avons
Authority,
fait valoir des arguments
representations
auprès
that
de
have been made
l'autorité
now,
palestinienne,
several times,
des
both
arguments qui ont
publicly
été
spoken
présentés
in
plusieurs
writing,
fois,
to me
tant
as
à l'oral
Prime Minister,
et par écrit,
and representations that I tested, if you will, President
Ce sont
Abbas
des
in a lengthy and robust
arguments
call
que
today
j'ai
to
rappelés
confirm
au président
the
Hamas
intentions
aujourd'hui avec le président
and the
Abbas au
ability to do
téléphone.
so. Now, part of what Minister Anand and her colleagues
La
are
ministre
doing
Anand et
is to
ses
provide
collègues
some resources to help with some
fournissent
governance
des
aspects
ressources
of those.
pour
But of course, the
contribuer
most important element
aux
of
réformes de
those
gouvernance.
representations, with respect to the democratic process.
C'est l'un des
Um,
aspects les plus
Who
importants de
cannot be
ces
part of
réformes.
that process? Hamas.
Le
Who can play
Hamas
no
ne peut
role
pas
in the
faire
future state?
partie
Hamas.
de
The
l'État palestinien à venir, il faut que l'État palestinien soit, que le Hamas soit démilitarisé, que la Palestine le soit aussi, pour que Israël et Palestine puissent vivre côte à côte dans la paix et la sécurité. C'est une courte période de temps, donc d'ici à l'Assemblée générale des Nations unies, nous allons collaborer avec l'autorité palestinienne, pas juste nous, mais nos alliés aussi, et des pouvoirs
including
régionaux,
those that the minister was with in
y
New York
compris
earlier
que la
this week,
ministre
and
a rencontré à
can't
New
name them
York
all, but
cette
of
semaine.
course,
Je ne pourrais pas
Saudi
tous les
Arabia,
nommer, mais
Qatar,
l'Arabie Saoudite,
Egypt, and
le
others,
Qatar, l'Égypte
who
et d'autres,
also, to broaden your question
qui,
a
eux
bit,
aussi,
have been very clear now that Hamas can play no role, that Hamas must
affirme
return
que
all
le
the
Hamas ne
hostages
peut
that
jouer
remain,
aucun rôle et doivent
and
rendre
the Palestinian
tout,
state must be
tous les
Follow-up.
prisonniers.
Yesterday, you had announced no intention
Une
to
question
recognize
complémentaire.
Palestine.
Hier,
Today, you
vous
have
n'aviez
announced
pas
that intention. It's
d'intention
impossible for
de
me
reconnaître
not to
l'État de
read into
Palestine.
that a
Aujourd'hui,
critique
vous
of
en avez
Israel's recent
l'intention.
behavior in the region.
Est-ce
Well, it's
est-ce que vous critiquez le comportement
there
d'Israël
are
dans la
elements,
région?
and I listed them in my remarks, and they played a
J'en
central
ai
factor
parlé
in
dans
our
mes
decision.
remarques
I think
et
one of
ce
the
qu'on a
one
vu
of the core
dernièrement
points
a joué un rôle
is
dans ma
that
décision.
Canada's had a
L'un des
long-standing
aspects clés,
principled stand, as
c'est
you
que
know.
le
I won't
Canada,
repeat it. You're
depuis
familiar
très
with it.
longtemps,
A
a
belief in a two-state
une
solution,
position très
inalienable
fondée
rights
sur des principes,
of both people,
une solution à
and the
deux
fact
États,
that
les
peace and
droits
security can only
inaliénables des
be
deux
achieved through it.
populations et la paix
That
et la
prospect,
sécurité.
that possibility of a two-state solution is being eroded before our eyes.
Ces
The
perspectives
accelerated
s'étiolent
settlements,
sous nos yeux.
the potential
On
partition
pense à la
of the West
colonisation
Bank,
de la Cisjordanie. On
the
pense aussi
actions
à
in
la
Gaza that
séparation de
shift
la
large portions
Cisjordanie
of the population, 80% of the population